Now broadcasting from the Next Gen Conservative Studio in sunny South Florida, bringing you the latest in politics, current events, and pop culture. This is the Whitfield Report with Sam Whitfield.
And welcome everyone to the Whitfield Report and our special edition where we've been talking about No Time to Die and the Bond franchise in general. I am back here with Mark Hunt, host of the Podcast of the Apes and podcast. And I think I got that right, Mark?
Yep, Podcast of the Apes.
And then,
podcast.
As always, we have Sean from Real News, Verse Media, and he's here.
Let's go.
We have all seen 007 at this point, the No Time to Die. So Mark and I did almost an hour and a half show last week regarding just Bond in general. So if you haven't seen that yet, I advise you guys to check that out after the show. Or if you guys haven't seen No Time to Die yet, I recommend that you go and watch that first because we will be diving into spoilers. But just real quick before we get into the movie, Sean, I didn't get the chance to ask you this, but how did you first get into Bond?
That's actually a good question, and there'll be no spoilers for this answer, but I pretty much just grew up on it because of my dad, and I think from what I remember, and it's like one of those weird younger memories that you remember, that it's just kind of like an obscure thing, but it is in some ways, I guess, meaningful, was I remember he would put in every now and then, I can't remember if it was a VHS or DVD, actually, because I was born in 97, and he would put in I think it was just the openings to The World's Not Enough, and I think GoldenEye. I remember the tank scene GoldenEye, but I really remember the boat chase at the beginning of The World's Not Enough, and I think it's just because, kids will like this action. And we put in, I don't even remember the rest of the movie. I just remember that because I think that's all I was shown. And that's kind of how I got into it. And fun fact, too, my name is Sean, spelled S-E-A-N. I am actually technically named after Sean Connery. That's how they got the idea for my name. My dad, one day, trying to think of names for me, he was like, well, what about Sean? Like Sean Connery, James Bond. They liked it. It worked. So I guess you could say I'm named after him. And I've always been a fan, always loved it. It's always just been fun, a part of my life. And I've seen all of them, maybe not the complete, ness of every film, but I've always seen all of them at some point. And I guess I'd say my Bond I grew up with was Brosnan and then Craig at the same time, kind of, but more so Brosnan.
Yeah. And then, Mark, you actually said that you named your son kind of after Q.
He was born in 2000, so this was right around the time. This was a little bit around the time before Die Another Day, and my son. We were thinking of a name for our second son, and I was like, Q. It's got to be Q. And of course, my wife's like, well, he has to have a real name. You can't just name him after a letter. I was like, all right, let's go. And of course, the first Q name that comes up is Quentin. And I was like, okay, everyone's going to think I named him after Quentin Tarantino. And I mean, as much as I like Quentin Tarantino, that's just, I'm not going to deal with that and he doesn't want to have to deal with that for the rest of his life. So we settled on Quinn, and just so I could call him Q. And luckily now he's 21. He'll be 22 in April. He's an electrician. So whenever I need any electrical work done, he's always working on it. He's good. He works on my car a lot. So every now and then, like, I'll walk out in the garage and the brakes are off and something, he's fixing it. And I'm just kind of walking around like, oh, how are the brakes on the car, Q? And of course he rolls his eyes. Or last week he installed on my back deck on my condo lights. And I walk out, and he's like, "Dad, I installed these lights for you." He said they're photosensitive lights, and I was like, "Oh, how does that work, Q?" He's like, "Oh well," and he just rolls his eyes again. He's like, "Okay, well, the sun goes down, they come on. The sun comes up, they turn off." I'm like, okay, all right. So I just love having him set up gadgets for me and explain them to me, just so I can. So he's kind of grown into his name, and at this time, at the age 21, he's accepted it. He rolls with it.
Sure, yeah, and I'm assuming that he's kind of a Bond fan since he
Yeah, my older
more or
son
less.
can take it or leave it, but Q seems he really enjoys them. We watch them together all the time. And he went with me. We went to the premiere together. And we
Yeah.
just kind of made a night of it. We went to the IMAX theater here in Columbus, Ohio, and we went out to dinner. There's an Irish pub in the shopping center with the theater. So we just kind of went out, and of course, first round of drinks was going to be vodka martini, shaken, not stirred, slice of lemon peel, garnish. So we had a few martinis, and then had dinner and went and saw the movie.
Awesome. Yeah, I was going to go see the show on Wednesday, but I actually had to cancel those advance ticket because the theater, we realized like an hour before the show that it was way farther than we thought. So I actually had to change it to the Thursday show, which was still the day before, and we got it to a much closer show. But yeah, once my mom and I got in there, she and I have always seen Bond together, from the beginning with Casino Royale, and it was kind of surreal and the end of an era, so to speak.
Yeah.
So
definitely.
yeah, and yeah, so just where to start with this, Sean? I sent Mark your message that you sent me last night, which I have to say was one of the most hilarious reactions I've read.
Well, see, I was texting you too, right? When like a few minutes after the credits started rolling, or a few seconds.
Yeah.
Because I knew you were the only person I had known who'd seen it and who gave a shit. And so I was like in shock. But I as a fan, I knew I'm waiting. I'm not leaving this seat till the end of the credits roll. Because there could be something very important, four important words, and sure enough. And to be clear, if it hasn't been already, these are spoilers, running in deep spoiler territory. And my reaction to you, because it was my birthday, and I always see a movie on my birthday, and this was perfectly timed. So I went, and then I just text Sam at the end of that. I'm like, what the fuck? They killed Bond. And Sam's like, happy birthday, Shaw. I'm like, fuck my birthday. They killed Bond. Like, what the hell? And then as I was sitting there, I hearing Louis Armstrong going, then at the very end it goes black, and I'm like, come on, and then it shows James Bond will return. I was like, oh, thank God. And that's kind of what I expected to show up, to kind of tell people how things were going. But honestly, the movie overall, I don't know how I feel about it. Because of the ending, I really don't know how I feel about it. There's a lot that I like, but I think personally, my feelings will not be fine about this till whatever they do next comes out. I think the quality of this movie weirdly rests on whatever they do next.
Yeah, well, and Mark and I texted back and forth, I think on Thursday a bit after I saw it, and Mark, your reaction was, I asked you what you thought, and you said it was mixed, and I'm kind of in the same boat. So, I guess just kind of start, what do you think were for either of you, what do you think were the high points of the movie, and, what do you think they really nailed? For me, seeing the gun barrel at the beginning in its proper place was a big high note. Seeing the Aston Martin, both of them, which the Aston Martin is kind of why it became a bit of a gearhead to begin with, and Aston Martin is my favorite. Like, if I could own
there it is.
if I could, if
No
I
Time to Die edition, of course.
if I could own
All
any
damaged.
vehicle, that would be at the Aston Martin DB5. So it was great to see in its full glory, doing Bond things, and then the V8, I think it is
It is.
from The
Yep.
Living Daylight. Yeah, those two are my favorites out of the entire Aston Martin line. So to see those back were really good. So those are like my two big highlight moments. And I actually thought the score was good. I tend to think that Hans Zimmer is a little overused, but he actually did pretty good with the score, I thought. So those are just kind of my high points. What about you guys?
The Hans Zimmer score, that was very good.
Nice.
Well, as far as highlights go,
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, the first 2 hours, 20, 30 minutes, everything up to the end, I was on board. Loving it. I mean, I enjoyed the movie a lot. I right from the beginning, and then when they introduced, because I knew I had no spoilers, but I did hear that something in the movie was very polarizing with the fans. And when they introduced his daughter, I thought, well, maybe that's it. And I was really enjoying the movie. I mean, right up until they got to the island, and then something inside me is like, man, I really like what I'm seeing, but man, if they kill off Bond, it's really going to piss me off. If Bond can just survive this movie, this will be up there with like Casino and Skyfall in the Craigs. I mean, I'm thinking this is really good. I'm loving it. I'm totally into this movie. I'm like, I've seen it twice so far. I'm thinking as long as Bond lives, maybe they might kill Madeline, and maybe he has to wind up raising a daughter or something. Maybe that's right up until the actually killed off Bond, and then I was just like, "You've got to be kidding me!" Like, and the fact, and I stayed to the very end too. I'm like, I got to see those 4 words, because if I don't, I really gonna not be happy. Like, I can't see them ending the series. I mean, and then when those 4 words came up, I was just kind of like, okay, I'm good. I'm not happy with the ending of this movie. And what was even crazier, well, first of all, when the credits started rolling, people started getting up and leaving. And I could hear people talking. And people are like, well, I guess that's it. I guess that's the last James Bond movie. And everyone's leaving. I'm like, no, I don't think that's the last James Bond movie. And then when James Bond will return. And then a few people, nowadays with Marvel, a lot of people stay to the end credits just in case there's added scenes. And when James Bond will return pops up, I could hear people around me going, oh, well, maybe Q teleported him off the island or something. A lot of people, non-Bond fans, were very confused by that, thinking, okay, well, Craig's coming back, like somehow he survived or something. So I think that was again, killing off a character that's in an ongoing series is going to be confusing anyway. So and I think I made the point in the last episode about this being kind of like the Dark Knight trilogy, where we get the beginning, middle, and end of Batman. I mean, with this particular Bond, we get the beginning, middle, and end of his career. And I think it's going to be confusing to a lot of people.
Yeah, quite literally his ending too. I mean, so, and
don't even get me started. Don't even get me started on that. I'll address that in a minute. There are so many plot holes with that. That's what really irritated me, especially on the second viewing. There's a lot of plot hole with that.
Yeah, well, we can jump into that. I am kind of in the similar boat as you were. My 2 biggest issues were, I mean, obviously the death. Now I will say this: I had heard like about a year and a half ago that there were rumors that they were going to kill Bond off.
Yep. That's
I heard those
allegedly
rumors
why
too,
Danny
but I
Boyle
didn't.
left.
Yeah.
And so like I had gone into this film, and I didn't want to say anything about this last week because I thought, well, maybe it might be a potential spoiler, but I was kind of like going into this being like, okay, well, they might do this, and if they, I'm hoping they don't, but if they do, I'm curious to see how they pull it off. And I will say that, like, as far as death scenes go, it wasn't the worst I've seen as far as like killing off titular characters. It was better than what they did in the Star Wars movie. I'm I'm still pissed off at the way they killed off both Han Solo and Luke, but that's a whole nother discussion for another time. My biggest my biggest problem other than the death was I really felt let down by the Siphon character. And
Hmm.
my mom and I were both talking afterwards, and she's like, "So, what exactly was his purpose?" She was. This was her talking to me. She's like, "I'm confused by that. Like, what was this guy even supposed to be doing? It seemed like he almost wanted to kind of be like a good guy, but then uh, like how did he go from wanting to kill Spectre to wanting to sell the
Great
nerve
question.
gas? Like
Yeah.
yeah,
The whole time, his motivation was to destroy Spectre, kill Blofeld. And it's exactly what he did. He got exactly what he wanted. And so then the leap to, I'm going to kill everybody, as many people as I can, even when Bond confronts him on the island and asks him, he's like, why are you doing this? He gives this insane answer. He's just kind of rambling on about I want to be their god and get under their skin, little, and all this kind of crap.
Tidy
Where I'm
it
just like,
up.
okay, this makes no sense whatsoever. Why do you want to? Why are you doing this? Like you literally achieved your goal. You got your revenge. What next?
See, I think I know what they were going for, but it wasn't clear, and I think that's the problem. Is I think after he got his revenge, which made sense, and I thought that was an interesting having that sort of third party element to the Spectre versus MI6 action. I think what he made the leap of was like, oh shoot, if I can get rid of these people, I can get rid of other bad people. Kind of like, where do I go next with this technology, this virus, this COVID, and see what I can deal with it. That's how I kind of interpreted it, but it was not clear because I was sitting there wondering too, like, why is he going all like big mastermind evil plan on everything? But I think he acted him well. I just think the character was kind of weak and mostly just didn't have enough screen time. Like, I think that's really the problem is that there just wasn't enough of him. He's almost shoved off to the side, and it's like you almost forget he's in the movie. You know what I mean? It's like I kind of like I knew he was there, but he didn't seem important, which in some ways is okay because it focuses more on Bond and his love and his daughter, but it just doesn't quite work for multiple reasons.
Yeah, if you go back to Doctor No, the movie and you see Doctor No right here, little
Yeah.
yeah,
figure. The movie's called Doctor No, but if you calculate the screen time, Doctor No's not really in the movie that much. He might be in the
Yeah.
movie maybe 5 minutes at most, but he at least carries a presence in it, and he does a stunning job. And
right.
oddly enough, though, there was a rumor that Safin was actually going to be Doctor No in this movie. I remember that rumor was going around for a while.
Mm.
Yeah,
Um,
I remember that too.
Well,
but
that's something that's also confusing. Is like it starts off with the when the credits start at the beginning, you get the circles like in Doctor No, like in the opening titles of that, and I thought, oh, so he is Doctor No, and then you see his lair, and you're like, oh, he really is, and then it's like he's not, and I'm like, is he his son or something? Like, it felt like they were teasing something that wasn't there.
Yeah, and then I also feel like the other thing too, and I actually So I watched On Her Majesty's Secret Service last night, as both of you know because you saw my Facebook post. But I also um, went back and watched Quantum of Solace, which is the worst Craig Bond movie, still in my opinion, because supposedly there was supposed to be like some sort of thing referencing Mr. White from Quantum of Solace, and I'm like, I didn't catch anything, and I feel like they've kind of overplayed the Mr. White thing with Craig's Bond a bit, like even after his death. I know that Madeline is his daughter, but I feel like that kind of plot point was just kind of wedged in there around Spectre. I don't know. It I feel kind of like the villain hierarchy of this entire series has kind of been a little weird.
Well, it seems like everything comes back to Mr. White, and I'm like, I get it. It works enough, but I think what they were more trying to do here is tie up all loose ends and fix Spectre, which I think they actually did well,
Yeah,
and conclude it. And I think that's, we'll dive into the ending a little bit later because that's a freaking massive discussion. But I think that's how you need to approach this film, is that this is supposed to be like this 5 movie arc with Craig that's its own little thing that I don't want to call an experiment, but it's kind of like, I don't know what you'd call it. It's like, well, what if we had an origin, the middle, and an end to Bond, and that's what this is.
yeah, it kind of felt this whole entire series is kind of like an episodic, almost kind of like a TV show that takes place
Mm-hmm.
over 15 years, but you know, uh, that's a whole, that's the other thing is Craig's been Bond for so long, and to continue a, story line for this long is pretty impressive. Usually, like, I think the Dark Knight trilogy, like, took place, like, over 8 years, roughly.
Mm-hmm.
And they wrapped it up pretty quickly. But yeah, I mean, I think seven, I feel like there was a lot that they could have done, but I feel like they were trying to make him into the Javier Bardem villain, but they they didn't for whatever reason.
I
Um,
thought it was. I did like they tied in to Madeline's story she told Inspector, because Inspector, she tells the story about when she's a little girl, and the man comes to their house, and she goes under the sink where they keep the bleach and the gun, and they tell that story at the beginning of No Time to Die.
right.
So much so that you see her opening the cabinet, and you see the bleach and you see the gun. And for half a second, I was like, "Oh, that's how he scarred up his face. Maybe she throws the bleach in his face or something,
Mm.
and she shoots him with the gun." But that didn't go anywhere. But so we got to see. So I thought that was a nice tie. I did like that little tie-in with Spectre, that he was the one that she was talking about, Inspector, as far as the man that came to their house and tried to kill them. But
Yeah.
but Safin, I don't know. I thought Rami Malek did okay. I didn't think he was. Yeah, he was definitely no Mads Mikkelsen or Javier Bardem, but definitely better than Dominic Green. So
Oh yeah, certainly. Yet dominant, and I mean, I would say too. Unfortunately, he was better than Blofeld himself. Which is
yeah, Blofeld though I just feel was just so. I mean, as much as I like Christoph Waltz, and I thought he did a fine job. I thought he did a little better than this. He was not. He just wasn't you. They just didn't know how to write for him.
yeah. Well, I also that was the other thing that kind of confused me too was he keeps like bringing this whole thing like, oh, Madeline's big secret will be, well, it'll be the death of you, and he keeps bringing that up in Spectre, and then again you know in No Time to Die, and I'm like, okay, so is Sapin supposed to be that secret? Because
Well, in No
if
Time to Die, I think the secret was that she had a kid. I don't know how he
Mm.
knew that. I took it that he knew that Bond had a kid, and that the moment you find out that's going to kill you, that you broke up with, because he's kind of he hinted that he set it up so that Bond would not trust Madeline, and they would break up. And somehow he found out that he knew that she was pregnant, and that was the secret. Because at the beginning, remember, at the beginning, she's telling him, "I've got a secret to tell you," assuming she's pregnant. And when they're in the car, he thinks it's because that she's still with Spectre. So when they're in the Aston Martin and they're like, shooting up the windows and everything, he says something about, everyone's got a secret. We just didn't get to yours yet.
Right.
It's true. It was that she was pregnant. And he assumed it was something else. And so that when he puts her on the train and she's leaving, if you look closely, she kind of puts her hand on her stomach.
Yeah.
And she takes off. So I'm assuming that's what Blofeld was talking about. That was the secret that was going to kill him. Or kill him would be that he basically split up the woman he loves, which of course enraged Bond. And they then go and do the, if you've read You Only Live Twice, the novel, in that novel, spoilers for a novel 50 some odd years ago, but that's the novel in the books where Bond kills Blofeld, and he kills Blofeld by strangling him and saying, "Die, Blofeld, die." And he kills him. And Blofeld is the one that has the poison garden on the island. He goes to the island to kill Blofeld, and he just basically strangles him. So when they were doing that in the movie, I thought it was kind of a cool tie-in. But then he let go and he walked away, but yet somehow that axe still killed Blofeld. So that was a kind of nice tie into the books.
Yeah, well, because he has the nanite poison, which actually...
Don't start me on that nanite poison. That was one of the little sticking points with me. This movie was a little more fantastical than all the other ones. This one, they really kind of, which I don't mind the little dash of sci-fi, little fantasy technology in my Bond, but it didn't. I don't know. That was at times I don't think was very well used in this movie.
Well, that's the thing with Craig's too, is they're so in many ways inconsistent. Not in terms of just quality, but like Casino Royale is just literally Bond and M. There's no Q, there's no gadgets, nothing. And then Quantum of Solace it's Quantum of Solace. It's a lot of things. And then Skyfall, I think, had the best balance of everything. It brings back everybody that should be in it, and it has some gadgets that are smart and make sense and modernized, but with this sort of traditionalness to it. And then Spectre kind of carries that over, maybe goes a little further. And then this one is by far the most gadget heavy, most sci-fi, which I don't mind that at all either. It's so weird how his movies are just kind of all over the place, which it shows, I think, part of the problem with his is kind of what Star Wars had too, but to much greater detriment. Different directors and maybe not a clear vision for this. Like, I don't know when this idea of killing off Bond ever started. I know that's why Danny Boyle quit. That makes sense now. But even when I went into this, I didn't even think about that. Be honest, I never thought about it because I completely forgot about it. And then when the moment was coming, I was like, no way. Because they make it clear what happens. There's no like, oh, you don't see a body. Oh, we don't know about that. No, it's clear. But in terms of positive...
Did you notice Q behind him? Because some people thought he survived. As soon as it happens, behind Q, they cut to him. He has on a digital readout behind him of Nomi and Bond, their smart blood. And he's got their biorhythm, all their readouts of their heart rate and everything. And as soon as that explosion happens, if you look, all of Bonds go to zero. So he they're definitely saying, yeah, he died.
Well, at least they did that. It's a nice little touch. But I will say, too, and it's going back to positive, the things that I instantly liked about this, other than the sound, music, cinematography, probably... I won't say the best, but it definitely makes a strong argument of any of them. I think Skyfall with, oh God, I can't believe I'm forgetting his name. I love cinematographer for that. Who also did Blade Runner 2049, bunch of others.
Roger Deakins?
Yeah, Deakins. Yeah, Roger Deakins. I think that's still the best. I would put this number 2 in terms of cinematography. I thought the action was pretty good. I like that one shot near the end. Always a big fan of those long one takes. And I think the story overall does work pretty well. The characters are good. I just think again I could start seeing some plot holes too that I bet in second, third, fourth viewings I'll see more, and that's kind of where my problems start. Because I don't maybe I missed it, but is it ever explained how Blofeld is controlling everything from his jail cell?
No, that was another thing I questioned. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
when they had the party, they're walking around with the eye. All right. Somehow that's obviously Blofeld doesn't have an eye. So that's how Blofeld's watching them. So are they saying obviously after he was arrested, is he watching on a monitor or is it implanted in his head? Like I understand that Blofeld's watching using the eye, but I'm not sure how he's watching it.
Yeah.
I don't.
Yeah.
I'm assuming they didn't go into his head and implant something while he was in custody because he was under maximum security. But somehow I don't know. And obviously he wouldn't have had like a tablet or something so he could watch. So I wasn't quite sure how Blofeld was using that eye to look at things. But then the one character Primo, the one that Bond called Cyclops, he had one too. So at times I was getting confused whose eye was looking at what.
Yeah.
And what at some point did Primo have Blofeld's eye so that he was like a kind of an avatar for Blofeld? But yeah, so that whole thing with the eye and how Blofeld was running things, that really confused me. Even after second viewing, I was like, okay, I'm not sure how this is what I'm supposed to know from this.
That was kind of how I interpreted things. But again, like you're right with the whole max security prison thing. I was kind of like hoping, I was kind of like, oh well, like Mr. White said, we have people everywhere. So I would even settled for something like, yeah, we found out that there was a guard or something that was on Blofeld's payroll or something like that would have at least like explained that like, yeah, he had an inside the prison or something like that. But no, there was nothing. And then I'm like, is Madeline like feeding him information secretly? Like I thought maybe that was the secret that would have killed Bond. Something something like that maybe, but they didn't really explore any of that. And
well, it's just not even explained, and that's what is weird to me is that it's just like, oh my God, how is he controlling everybody from his own cell? We're gonna check everything out, and then they don't find anything. They don't explain. He just dies, and then that's the end of it. I'm like, was he pre-recording a message or was it somebody else impersonating him? Like it just made no sense, and I don't understand why that wasn't explained at all because that seems like such an obvious thing. And the other thing that doesn't make sense too is when Safin has his daughter, and he's like, "You can come with me and I'll protect you, or you can just go," and she just freaking goes. And he doesn't even like. I thought what was going to happen, and I think this would have been really good. She starts walking off, then it goes off bit, and you hear bang, and he has like the gun or something, like kills her, cold blood. That would have been something like whoa, that I think is what they should have done. But no, she just like goes. That's it. And
here's the thing with the
I don't get
daughter.
why.
There was one scene. This I even on the second viewing, they. Bond meets the daughter. They the next morning they're all in a Range Rover or something.
Is it the mosquitoes? Yeah.
Yeah, and she says something about I got a mosquito bite.
It's so fucking random.
It was and then she goes did she find another one? Because then she sees another one. She says, "Oh, do mosquitoes have friends?" And she said no. And so in the back of my mind, I'm like, "Oh, she's infected with something."
Yeah.
And then later she bites Safin. I'm like, okay, did she just infect him with something? Like, are they setting something? Are they laying breadcrumbs or something? But nothing.
Well, I'm just kind of, well, I wrote that off as, little kids say stuff. Like
it was just so random, though.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't.
Yeah.
And they addressed it twice. She says she's found one mosquito bite. She makes a comment, and then she said I assumed she found another one, and she said, "Oh, do mosquitoes have friends?" And her mom just kind of laughs and says, "Oh, I don't think so." I'm like,
I
okay,
think it's
what's
supposed to be metaphoric or some sort of symbolism, but it's
Yeah.
very clumsy how it's done.
mm,
It almost feels like this movie. Like I will say I like long movies, so I like that this is long, but it still kind of feels like that either stuff was cut or something because, like I said, villain does have a lot of screen time, which can work and not work, but it feels like there was should have been a little bit more to explain things, and there's just random things that aren't explained that are kind of important or kind of maybe not important, but still may get you confused. That it almost feels like things are cut out of this.
well, here's
Um,
the most confusing thing of the entire movie that pretty much is that irritates me about the death of Bond. And second viewing, I still couldn't figure it out. What's the big deal at the end? What's the urgency? They have the island. They have all the chemicals are in the bunker. The chemicals aren't going anywhere. Safin's leaving the island. Bond gets his family. They're on the boat. The Americans and the Japanese are coming. I got that. And if I'm thinking, if Bond just got off in the boat, he would be fine. And
mhm.
then M is calling him. He says, "Well, what do I tell the Americans and the Japanese?" And he's like, "Tell them nothing." And he goes back in to open the doors so they can shoot missiles. But I'm like, tell them nothing. What you do is you get your ass off the island. You call the Americans, the Russians, the Japanese. You call everybody and say, "Hey, there is a terrorist organization with weapons of mass destruction on this island, and there is a freaking uh, there is germs and that will kill everybody on this planet. We need to seal this off, send people in, and destroy this because it will kill all of us." I didn't quite get the secrecy. I didn't understand why, because it wasn't like these were launching or anything.
Mm.
He had to open the door so they could shoot the missiles in, but then the door shut, and then Q tells him, "Well, the missiles are just going to bounce off the blast doors if we don't open them again." I'm like, okay, so what? You just load up more missiles. Like, nothing's going to happen. I didn't quite get why the chemicals had to be destroyed right that minute, enough that Bond is sacrificing his life to do it, when all you had to do was get off the island and say, "All right, my job's done. I've saved my family. You guys go in there. You guys need to destroy these because everyone will die." The chemicals weren't going. Safin was leaving. He was getting on
Mm.
boats and leaving. So unless there was something I missed, I did not get why Bond had to sacrifice himself to destroy the chemicals that moment.
Didn't Safin go back to like open the blast doors though, and that was why?
Exactly. So what? Yeah, he went to close them because Bond opened them, and then all of a sudden Safin goes back and closes them again. If Bond hadn't opened them, he probably wouldn't have gone back to shut them again. And it wasn't like, so if Safin went back anyway, okay, what's he going to do? It wasn't like he was unleashing the chemicals on anyone. He was just shutting the doors and killing Bond. So I didn't quite, unless I missed something, I didn't quite get the urgency at the end that the chemicals had to be destroyed right then and there. And it's not
Mm.
like and why you had to keep it a secret from the Americans. Or the Americans aren't going to do anything. I mean, at that point I was like, guys, be honest. Let everybody know there's a biohazard on this island of epic proportion. We need to all get together, go in and destroy this stuff. Because again, the chemicals weren't going anywhere. They were just sitting there.
Right. I mean, it was.
That
Yeah.
was the biggest. I mean, until I figured that out, seeing it a second time, it just pissed me off even more that Bond, because they did it just, and then of course, then my other big thing at the end was the screenwriters felt the need to do this fantasy Disney-like magical curse where Bond can never be with the woman or the child he loves. He calls up Q and he's like, "Q, I've been infected. What can I do?" And Q, rather than saying, "Oh, just get off the island. We'll do something. We'll see if we can come up with a cure." He's like, "No, it's permanent, Bond. It's eternal." And I'm like, okay, you're not even going to try? I mean, in the
Mm.
day of COVID and social distancing from your loved ones, he can't even do that he's like, he's got to just give up and die. I'm like, you don't, I don't understand if they're nanites or nanobots, why an electromagnetic pulse isn't going to destroy them, because they're essentially just robots. But it just seemed like he didn't, like, okay, can you at least try and get a cure? Q just made it seem, oh no, it's permanent. Sorry. Like they went out of their way to set up this no-win scenario for Bond, where it's like, okay, try at least.
Well, what I think would have been better, and this is what I think maybe it kind of doesn't answer the urgency question, which I didn't know, so you mentioned is a good point, is so when he realizes he's infected, he's also shot like a bunch of times. And I think at that point, Bond's kind of like, okay, I'm going to die. One way, missiles or not, I'm probably going to die. And so that's where I thought, okay, that's why he's sacrificing himself. But with the virus part, that's what doesn't make sense, because I get that, okay, maybe there's no cure. And so I thought, well, he's probably then saying, well, even if I do survive, which is unlikely since how many times he's been shot, then I won't be able to see my loved one. So there's no point in living. So fuck it, I'll just die. But if that was the case, why couldn't they have just said, we can find a cure, Bond, we'll figure it out? And he just goes, right. No, there's no point in living if I can't, see her for whatever. I mean, I think it just they got into a corner, is ultimately the problem with the ending, is it gets into a weird corner that I honestly think there's no good way to get out of it except a happy ending. Hey, Bond wins, doesn't die, like every Bond movie, and we go on to the next adventure. Maybe it would have been better his daughter died, I think, I think they just didn't want to have the girl die because that's been done to death, no pun intended. So I think actually having maybe the daughter die would have been more interesting. I don't know. I just think I see what they're going for, but I still
they wanted to
think
put
it's
Bond
a
in a situation where, okay, Bond's going to die because he can't be with the woman and the child he loves. So how do we get to that point? So then they worked from that point and went backwards, and we're like, okay, well, we got to do something so that he can never be physically around them. Oh, well, the virus targets them, so it's the catch at the end is going to be he can never, he'll be infected and he can never, because after he gets shot up, he's climbing out. He wants to get out of there because he calls Q and asks him. He says, "What can we do?" He's like, "There's a cure, right?" And he even asks Q the very question, "What can we do?" And that's when Q is like, "Nope, sorry, Bond, it's permanent. Sorry, it's eternal, whatever that means."
Yeah.
And I like how
Bond
they're
gives
so
up. I'm
quick
like,
to
dude,
determine
you should
that.
not do whatever you do. Don't work a suicide hotline, Lordy.
Well, and in even Q's reaction to Bond being infected, I thought was very un-Q. I mean, I get that he's a scientist, and scientists are supposed to be clinical about things, but even so, it kind of felt like he should have been like, "Oh, we'll try and find, a cure, for you or something." And, yeah, he was kind of like, "Yeah, you're pretty much fucked."
And he uses the word eternal. That bugged me because I'm like, what scientist is going to use that flowery language? He was just like, "Oh no, it's there permanently. It's eternal." Whatever that means.
That makes me think of actually Norm Macdonald's joke that I'm pretty sure if you get cancer, the cancer dies too. If
Christ.
if you I was kind of like, yeah, that was kind of what I thought of. I'm like, so wait, these nanites are more deadly than cancer or something. I was kind of hoping that, I mean, at least it would have so sucked that they would have killed off Bond. I would have preferred that Bond actually physically die in battle with Safin or something.
Well, I think the problem too with this is he doesn't die from this is what would have made it. I think they could have gotten away with this more is if it was somebody who was an even match to him or better. Instead, it's this random dude that has a coronavirus that he's trying to infect with relatives, and he doesn't he doesn't seem like the type of guy that's too physical, if you know what I mean. Like, this Bond is very physical, very strong, very muscular. So you think, well, this guy's either got to outsmart him with his brain or be stronger than him. And that's how he dies. Instead, it's like he's not really either of those things. Like, Safin isn't really that smart. I mean, I guess maybe he is because he killed Spectre when nobody else could, but how he kills Bond is by just like surprise, bang, 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 and then hits him over the head with the virus. Like, he doesn't seem like an even match, is what I'm trying to say. That it doesn't come
look
off
at Quantum
right.
of Solace, that end scene where Daniel Craig is fighting that scrawny little Dominic Green. I'm like, okay, first of all, one punch he would have taken him out. There's no way Dominic Green is going to last in that fight 2 or 3 minutes. One punch and that guy would have dropped him. But they like, whatever. Let's try and make it look real. But
Yeah.
I think honestly, but I will say I don't think Safin wanted to kill him. I think he wanted him to suffer. I think he infected him with him. I think he was wanting him to go the rest of his life without being able to see his wife and kid. I think he would have been much happier for him for that, because at that point, Bond, I mean, he was shot up, but I think he could have gotten away and lived. He knew he was dead. He knew Bond had the gun, so that was his. And he knew that as soon he was probably going to. Chances are he was going to kill him and go open the blast doors and get out of there. And Safin's last screw you is like, okay, well, if you're going to get out of this alive, I'm going to make sure you can never touch them again. I think he assumed he was going to live and not die, and then Bond just blew him away. So I think I kind of appreciate that aspect of it, but the one thing I just at the end of the day, the one thing I don't need to see in a James Bond movie is James Bond dying. I mean, comes down to that for me. I just like, as much as I didn't need to see Han Solo die or anything like that. But when they killed off Han Solo, you're like, okay, well, that's it. Han Solo's dead. They're not doing it, and they can go back and do Solo Star Wars story, but that's it. You can't reset that clock. With James Bond, it's like, we know the clock's getting reset. The story's getting reset. It's almost like, why bother doing it? Because now, whenever I sit down and I take out that Craig box set and I sit down and I start watching them in order, I'm like, this is the one where Bond dies. Like, this is the Bond that Bond dies. And it kind of just, for me, as much as I loved 85% of the No Time to Die, it's always going to be the one where Bond dies at the end, and not in a great way, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I've been noticed that, like, watching Quantum of Solace last night, because Green makes the comment like everything he touches like withers and dies. So like part of me was kind of like, so wait, were they always planning this in like?
I don't think so.
I don't
think they
think
were making this up as they go.
I don't
same.
I don't think so either, but it does kind of beg the question now, kind of knowing how all ends. And like there were other situations, like in the other films, where like Bond should have died and he did it. I guess my biggest issue was, I mean, obviously the fact that he died was an issue, but I don't even feel like they gave him like that good of a death. If they had to.
Well, somebody on Reddit had a good way of putting this is too much about Craig and not enough about Bond. And I think that's kind of the problem here, is that I get it, his is continuous, okay, fine. But like, Mark's just saying, we don't need to kill him, because if we do, then that means, okay, franchise is done, which it's not going to be. Makes too much money. It's iconic. It's legendary. It's going to go on forever.
And they confirmed it at the end credits. The end credits, they flat out say Bond's coming back.
Yeah.
Bond will return in the same movie, just minutes later after his death.
Yeah, well, and then
that's why I came out confused. I'm like, that sounds like a gut punch, but then I'm like, but he's coming back. So like, what am I supposed to feel? Confused?
So yeah,
a lot of people are. A lot of people will be.
So I mean, I guess one of my biggest issues, kind of not just with No Time to Die, but really kind of with Craig's whole series in general, was the fact that it was chronological. I get it for Casino Royale and Quantum.
Mm,
I get that Casino Royale was um it was Bond's origin story. Obviously he didn't have the gadgets and everything. Um and whatnot. So I understood that, and then Quantum I was kind of like, okay, well, they're going to kind of wrap up everything with, um, you know, Vesper and that whole thing. The fact that they like kind of dragged, that whole storyline throughout all the movies instead of just like allowing Skyfall to kind of be its own individual story and go from there, I was kind of like,
Yeah, it's
uh,
weird because you have 5 movies. You have Casino Royale, his origin story, because Quantum is basically origin story part 2. I mean, they take place within hours of each other, and
mm,
then that's he becomes 007. Your next movie, Skyfall, he's already talking about, well, I guess we're played out. The end of my career. He's already the old dog, new tricks. They hit you over the head that he's now at the end of his career. I'm like, what? What? You just became 007, and you're already talking about how you're, and then Spectre and No Time to Die are basically two. I mean, by the end of Spectre, he's quit already, and so it's like with Craig, you really never got to see him as James Bond. Just here's your assignment, 007, go out and save the world. It was
mm.
always kind of like not kind of a soap opera almost, because every mission, every movie, it's almost something personal. He's protecting M with Silva, and then Spectre, of course, it's Oberhauser / Blofeld's after him, and then by the end of the movie, he quits, walks away. Of course, he quit at the beginning of Skyfall as well. So Bond's constantly, as soon as he becomes 007, he's quit again and off in hiding. So I think that's one of the reasons why at the end of No Time to Die, it's like, what, we're going to assume he's dead again, and he's going to go off and retire somewhere. So they kind of
Mm.
dipped into that well quite a few times.
I someone on one of the Reddit threads I saw, they had an interesting theory, which was that Craig's entire saga, and this doesn't really make sense to me at all, but from what I've heard a few people say, they're like Craig's entire saga is Madeline explaining it to their daughter and kind of like how I'm in a sort of like How I Met Your Mother uh style of things. And
I
I'm
hope
like
not.
I'm like that's a real stretch
Yeah,
there.
I have there's no way when they wrote Casino Royale all the way back then that in their mind is like, oh, this is going to be at the end of the day in 15 years we're going to reveal that this is actually Bond's widow and his
Mm.
daughter telling a story. There's no way they had that planned out. I guarantee it was just something they threw in at the last minute when writing this script.
Oh yeah, well the other thing too was, so my theory originally when the trailers first came out was because they were implying that this was going to be a remake of um that this was kind of going to be Craig's version of On Her Majesty's Secret Service. And I remember reading that the original plan wasn't to kill off Tracy at the end of On Her Majesty's. I remember reading that the original plan for the sequel was they were going to kill off uh, Tracy in the beginning of the following film
Mm-hmm.
and then have it be Bond's revenge
Right.
story. But for whatever reason, Lazenby didn't sign on, which I forgot to ask you last time, Mark. You might know this better than I would, but did Lazenby get fired from Bond or did he quit the franchise?
No, he quit. He quit. He was signed up. The movie came out and did really well, and their intentions were to film another movie. And they came to him and said, okay, look, we want to do Diamonds Are Forever. and he just walked away. He said, "I don't want to do it."
And yet he ended up dating Jill St. John or something. Ironically, later, I remember reading. But yeah, so I was kind of like, okay, they're going to do On Her Majesty's like in the proper way. I thought Tracy was going to get killed off in Italy, and so it was going to be like Bond's revenge.
I did too. I thought Madeline. I would have sworn Madeline's probably going to die in the opening. Well, until the trailer came out, because once the trailer came out, they showed that scene with her and Blofeld later. So I thought, well, maybe she's in it more, because I just assumed, yeah, she was going to die at the beginning. But yeah, they really wanted this to be Craig's On Her Majesty's Secret Service. I mean, they had the instrumental of the love song playing in the Italy scene. They had when Bond and M kind of patch things up and kind of get on the same page together. They're standing on the banks of the Thames. They play the theme song from On Her Majesty's. And then, of course, at the end, they much like the end scene of On Her Majesty's, you see the Aston Martin driving along the shoreline, but it's Madeline and Matilda, and they flat out play the Louis Armstrong song. So I mean, they were really trying to hit everyone over the head with the On Her Majesty's connection.
That's okay. The M thing. I'm glad you brought that up, because that was one thing that I also had a real issue was with this M, because apparently he's the one who comes up with the nanite virus.
Well,
thing.
I mean, he didn't come up with the virus, but yeah, he helped found the project, the Heracles project, and he was in charge of it, and they wanted to come up with the perfect assassin that would only target one person, so and so and so and so, and it was never intended to fall into the wrong hands, which, like every other Bond movie, the MacGuffin was never intended to be in the wrong hands, but that's what makes a Bond movie. But yeah, and then it was kind of weird how it was, I don't know if they were trying to make us mistrust M, to think maybe he's a Spectre agent or something. I don't know if that's what they were going for. They were definitely trying to sow those kind of seeds, but then at the end of the day, they patched it up.
Well, and it kind of flies in the face too of everything in Spectre, because in Spectre his whole thing is, no, technology, isn't always the best. We need a man in the field, and that's why we still need the 00 section. And that was kind of his whole thing in Spectre, which I thought was, Spectre has a lot of flaws, but that was not one of them. I was kind of like, that was one of the strong points. And then I remember I watched Spectre the night before I saw this one, so Spectre was fresh in my mind, and so when Q did that, I'm like, but wait, you said in the earlier film, like, that flies in the face of your whole philosophy about like needing the 00 section in the first place. So
I guess he didn't want the government to be able to peek in at everybody through the Nine Eyes program. So he didn't want all that surveillance, but it is okay to develop a virus that can target individual people or groups of people and just wipe them out. Apparently, he can sleep at night with that one.
Yeah, and then also like how they made like the subtle nods that like, his judgment was impaired because he's an alcoholic. I thought
that was just Bond being like, pissy at him. I thought it was kind of...
that's why I took it that way too.
Yeah.
I took it that way too, but I also kind of felt like I took it that way, but I also feel like, okay, are they going to go somewhere with that? Or, and then the other thing too is this is the only Bond, as far as I know, and unless there's, because I know Mark and I both read the books, and as far as I know, Mallory is the only M we know of that like we actually know his real name and whatnot, right?
No, that's if you read the books, Bernard Lee from the early movies, his
Yeah.
name is Admiral Miles Messervy, and that's from the books. In Spy Who Loved Me, when they meet in the pyramid, and he meets with General Gogol. He calls him Miles, so that kind of confirms that he's Admiral Miles Messervy from the books. There's a then the M after that would be Robert Brown, who was in 4 of the movies, Octopussy to License to Kill. He appears in Spy Who Loves Me as Admiral Hargreaves. The theory is that that when he came around, that Admiral Hargreaves, when that M left, he got promoted to M. So a lot of people think, okay, that M, his name's Admiral Hargreaves. At the end of Skyfall, people have that there's that little box that Moneypenny gives Bond at the end.
With a dog in it.
It has the little dog in it. And if people have zoomed in on the box, and I can't remember the name. It has her name on it. So we kind of know her name, because if you look at the front of the box, people bring it up, and it ends with the letter M, and it's slipping my mind right now what her name is. But so we kind of know their names. And speaking of all the previous M's, there's that shot in the movie where you see Judi Dench's portrait.
Yeah, I
like
that.
And then they cut over, and of all Robert Brown, who was M in the 4 Bonds, his picture's in there too. Because I'm looking up and I'm like, oh my gosh, that's Robert Brown. He was only in 4 movies, but they got his picture up. It was a nice little nod to him.
I did like that. I did like the nod to Jamaica and to GoldenEye and Fleming's. I don't know if that was like an exact recreation, but I've seen.
No, that was the exact house. That was the house. You can, if you've got the money, you can go to GoldenEye and you can stay in that house. And that was the actual Ian Fleming house.
That's awesome.
Wow. Yeah.
Well, see, you mentioned Jamaica, and that makes me think of something else we gotta dive into, which is the female 007. Which, when I first heard the news about that, I thought, oh, fuck, this movie's going to be woke. It's going to be shit. But I kind of heard the argument that, well, she's not going to be a female James Bond. She's just going to be 007. And I'm like, okay, but I thought you couldn't do that. I could be wrong on this because I don't know the lore that well. But I always thought the agent has their code number and that's theirs. Because it's never, to my knowledge, in the movies at least, ever been like, oh, 006 and GoldenEye? Oh, he's also like this person, this movie. I don't think that's happened before. And so I thought it was a little forced, but it didn't bother me that much in this movie. I just thought it was unnecessary in some ways, but it was kind of like, okay, he's got a replacement. I get it. Which I thought was fine. That didn't bother me because they didn't go like, oh, well, I'm a female and I kick ass and I'm better than you. It was more just like, no, I'm your replacement, and we're competing.
And she wasn't perfect either. That was the other thing. It's like some of these movies, sometimes they go out of their way to say, oh, she when they decide to be woke, that, she knows better than Bond and she's better than Bond. And I did like the fact that they kind of made her, she wasn't as experienced. She did, Bond got one on her. He grabbed the scientist, got away from her, stole her plane. And in the end, she came around and she says, this guy has a lot to teach me. So much so that she gave up the 007 number, which I thought was kind of cute.
I like that. Because I like, too, like you made a good point, is that he's still better than her, which is makes sense, number one. And that's in line with the characters. So that's where, again, because some people are still saying it's a woke movie. I don't think so. No. I think it's because of stuff like this, where it didn't cross that path and go, the woman's a Mary Sue like Rey and can fly the Millennium Falcon and use the Force and a lightsaber and everything and has no training. No, she's a real human being and is new to this, which makes it work. The only other thing that I thought was a little random is, why is Q gay? Because they make it subtle, which didn't bother me, but it's like, why? Why
I think just because the actor, because I knew the actor that plays him, Ben Whishaw, I know
is
he's
gay?
gay.
Yeah, yeah,
I'm assuming that was the only reason. I mean, it wasn't, and I mean that didn't bother me either. Just because, I mean, since Skyfall, Hughes never really struck me as a ladies' man anyway. So,
yeah.
I mean, that's just the way he acts. So, I mean, I just was like, okay, it was like kind of no
Makes
surprise
sense.
there, but which is fine. Didn't bother me. I really like the actor, and I love the character.
Yeah, same.
And it was like you said, it wasn't. They didn't hit you over the head with it. It was just they slipped a line in and didn't make a huge deal of it anyway.
Yeah, I was pretty much fine with it. It just took me out for a second. I was like, oh, of course, they just had to do it. But it was subtle enough and just not in your face that I was fine with it. But
And of course, if you want Bond not so subtle gay reference, go back to Diamonds Are Forever with Mr. Wint and Mr. Kidd. Boy,
oh my
what they did, they were
God.
doing back in the day.
Yeah. Even as a kid, I was like, do those guys like each other, Dad? That was really on the nose. That was woke before woke was a thing you could argue. But yeah, that was the one thing I do like is that a lot of the Easter eggs, if you could even call them, or the callbacks, for the most part, are subtle. For the most part, because I hate when they're so on the nose. But with this one, like the circles from Doctor No, it's fairly subtle, and the cars, I guess, a bit more obvious. But I do like that they use that V8 Aston because the Dalton Bonds, you could argue, were kind of Craig before Craig.
Yeah,
no doubt.
They were ahead of their time,
which made sense to use that. And it's kind of like that's not one that gets. I don't think it's ever been used since those, which I thought was cool. Instead of going, oh, here's the DB5 again. You don't remember that.
And the Aston Martin has the exact number plate. If you go back and watch Living Daylights, it's the exact same number plate.
Oh, that's good. That's a good detail.
Yeah, and the other thing I like too is that Aston Martin is the one that Craig gets from that drug deal or whatever in Casino Royale, right? He wins the.
Here's my thing. Going back and watching that, now that you say that, I'm assuming it is, except in Casino Royale, the Aston Martin is a left-hand drive, and when we see it again in Skyfall, it's the traditional British right-hand drive.
Oh.
So I don't know if. So I'm watching. I'm like, okay, is it supposed to be the same one? I mean, or since they installed gadgets on it, did Q just move the steering wheel over to make it? I mean, not that you can't. I don't know if there's a law against having a left-hand drive, but it does go from left-hand drive to right-hand drive between those two movies. It's the exact same number plate, though. It is the BMT 216A.
Well, the Brits are fucking weird when it comes to their steering. Anyway, so.
Well, believe me, I drove for 2 weeks in England with a right-hand drive on their roads. It's the first 48 hours, I thought I was gonna have a nervous breakdown.
Of course, and of course, they think we're crazy, too. So, my other problem was that Ana de Armas was not in this.
Oh yeah,
at all.
She had one scene, pretty much that one sequence,
and they made her seem like a lot more substantial of it.
I've got her Funko Pop up on the shelf up here. Like they definitely were marketing her as a big character, but yeah, she did not have much screen time at all. But good. I mean, I liked her character.
Well, at least they didn't murder her like they did every other hot Bond girl in the Craig.
She kind of reminded me of Mary Goodnight from Man with the Golden Gun. Kind of that she's out in the field, she just got out of training, kind of ditzy, saying the wrong things. Paloma can fight a lot better than Mary Goodnight could.
Yeah.
Well, as much as I wanted to see more of her, I think they had to in many ways, I think the fact they showed restraint in some ways is good because she served her purpose.
Yeah.
And that's it. I think that's the problem with just, seeing a movie when it comes out in general is they got to market it. They got to market it with the stars. They got to market it with the hot stars. So they thought, oh, she's in it. We're going to market the shit out of her. And I think that's why people are kind of like, well, I want more of her. There should have been more of her. It's like, yeah, I understand that. But I think they did it right in terms of not using her more than she should have been.
And speaking of supporting characters, as much as I hate, and I really hate that they killed Bond, I wasn't crazy about the fact they killed Felix too. I mean, I got the death of Felix Leiter and Bond in one movie, and
Blofeld.
And Blofeld.
So when they killed Felix off, my thought was, okay, there's a good chance that the theory that Bond dies in this is probably going to happen. Because I was kind of like, I'm kind of like, Felix is a reoccurring, character. The other thing though is what I don't like is with the way they kind of wrote Felix and Bond was like they were referencing like all these adventures that I'm like
that we never got to see.
Wait, how many Craig adventures were there?
I'm assuming a ton between Quantum and Skyfall.
Yeah, there had to have been.
And Spectre, he does mention Felix again. He says, "Oh, when he's Scarpine's widow, he tells her, he says, oh, she's afraid for her life from Spectre, and he is, oh, I'm gonna put you in touch with my friend Felix." But I kind of did like that because again, this is for people who've read the books. In the books, whenever Felix and Bond get together, they sit down in a bar and drink and get drunk and that's like the one person he trusts can loosen up. They do bar games, drinking games, and they just get drunk together. And that relationship was straight from the books. And so that was one of those, I don't know if you'd call it an Easter egg, but that's one of the scenes I did appreciate, is like that's one of the really few times in the movies where they really got the Bond Felix relationship, even though technically they didn't really earn it. I mean, you saw Bond and Felix together only a couple times in the Craig movies, and
which when they first introduced Felix way back in Casino Royale back in the day, my initial thought back then was like, oh yes, they're going to make Felix like a central character in this Craig series. This is going to be awesome. And then they brought him in, but they never really did anything. Whereas, like, I will say that one thing that the Dynamite comic book series that they have going on for the last few years, one thing that does really well is it actually gives like Felix an origin story and like a bit of like he's actually part of the comic book universe.
Oh, he got his own miniseries.
Yeah. So
yeah, in the books, one thing they kind of did with Dalton and this is in the second Bond book, Live and Let Die. They show the scene. They actually film the scene in License to Kill where he's fed to the sharks.
Yeah.
And except in the books, I think he loses his leg and his arm. So I was always kind of wondering if they're ever going to do that. Maybe they were setting up Jeffrey Wright's Felix to kind of go that, because after book 2, the rest of the Bond series, Felix has an artificial arm and an artificial leg, and in fact leaves the CIA and joins the Pinkerton Detective Agency. And he's a detective most of the time, which they did in the Dynamite comics, but rather than just flat out kill him off. So I was kind of, when Jeffrey Wright came in Casino, I was like, are they going to kind of try and maybe do, because if Dalton had done another movie, it would have been interesting to see if Felix had come back and they addressed the fact that he has an artificial leg.
Yeah, my one problem with the License to Kill is at the very end where where
I know what you're gonna say.
Where Felix is just like a little too cheery for just having like lost his widow.
In my head canon, they gave him too much pain meds, and he was just too happy.
I get that. I get that it's 1989. I get that, but even so, I'm like, yeah, this, you know.
Your wife was brutally murdered just a few days ago. Could you kind of maybe act like you're a little bummed about it?
Yeah, I mean,
maybe you didn't like her that much.
Yeah, I mean that they gave. Yeah, I mean they had a darker story arc in Miami Vice for God's sake. So,
well, that's the you know what to kind of circle back to the beginning of this. That's the one scene as a kid that was super dark to me. Was when he gets fed to the sharks. I don't quite. I mean, because there's other movies I've seen as a kid that you could argue have like technically darker things, but aren't visually, as graphic, I guess you could say. But I remember just for a Bond film, I was like, "Whoa, is this Bond? Like, what is this? This is pretty dark." I mean, as an adult now, it's not that much, but it's kind of like for that time.
Oh yeah.
Like I was just saying, like it shows that what they were trying to do with Dalton was ahead of its time. It just really wasn't ready for it yet.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean Dalton's Bond is the one I picture when I read the novels most of the time.
You know who also said this is very interesting. Can you guess which director said that their favorite Bond is Dalton?
Well, John Glenn, because John Glenn directed both of his.
Christopher Nolan.
Chris Nolan.
Yep. He said on a podcast, I don't know how long ago, but he did. I saw a clip of it yesterday. He said his favorite Bond film what was his favorite Bond film? I actually forget what his favorite film was, but his favorite Bond was Dalton. But I can probably find that. But it is just interesting.
He was rumored to. There were rumors that he was going to do a fifth Brosnan film if they had done one, which I thought would have Tarantino. I mean, which I think would have been super. I think having Tarantino direct a Bond film would have been super interesting.
I kind of took that with I remember them talking about it back in the day. I think it was I never really took it too super seriously, just because I mean, now we're hearing Tarantino. There's been rumors that he was going to do a Star Trek movie, and that's kind of gone by the wayside. So I remember them talking about, Tarantino and Pierce Brosnan. He confirms it. He said, yeah, they kind of kicked around the idea a little bit of it, but I don't really think much happened from it.
I think that would have been a mistake because he's in a totally different genre with a totally different rating for a movie too.
Yeah.
It just it wouldn't work. But I do remember now, Nolan's favorite film was of the Bonds, On Her Majesty's Secret Service, which makes sense. And his favorite Bond was Dalton. I was trying to think of something else I noticed in this film, but I think that forest scene where he's in the forest and there's like Range Rovers are coming after him. That scene and also the Jamaica scene were, I mean, there's other ones too, but those kind of I thought they felt more classic Bond, but also this modernist where the Jamaica one's more fun and quippy and one-linery and the martinis too, which is perfect. But then in the forest, he's actually using his resources kind of almost Rambo-esque and in a clever way with the tow cable and all these other things. Like that to me seemed like one of the most, especially these recent ones, the more in character of like he's not just beating people up, but he's actually thinking of smart ways to use what he has in his situation.
Kind of like the showdown at Skyfall, where they were kind of doing the, fabricating all the little weapons and traps for everybody.
Yeah. And I love that stuff. Like, because to me, that is kind of, I mean, they've done it in the past Bonds, but like when they do in these recent ones, it feels more like this is where Bond could be more interesting with the action is that it's not just cars and big stunts, big explosives, but when he's stripped down to nothing, he can still kick your ass with your helicopter and your machine guns, which I think is interesting.
Yeah, and I mean, I also with the Force, I like the little nod to Roger Moore's Bond where he kicks the
Oh, I
car off
love that.
the mountain,
That
and
was like one of my favorite parts. It's just like,
Yes.
do it.
It wasn't the same thing with the fact that he crushes that guy
Right.
with the Range Rover. I instantly picked up on that nod. So
Mhm. Which, fun
so
fact, Roger Moore didn't like that in that film. He didn't
No,
want him to do it, but they left it in there anyway.
they even filmed two different versions.
Yep.
They filmed him kicking it. Or no, first he takes out the pin. He throws him the pin, the dove pin that he left on the dead man's body that he killed. He throws him the dove pin and then kicks it. And then Roger Moore's like, well, can I just throw the dove pin in? And the irony being that the weight of that pin is what causes it. So he doesn't kick it. He sends him over by throwing the pin in. And the irony being the weight of the pin that he left on the dead man's body is the weight that was all the weight that was needed to tip the car over. And the director, I think it was John Glenn, he said, no, let's film it both ways. And he was like, no, we're using that one. That is just way cooler.
yeah, yeah. I mean, I certainly think I think it worked better. One of my complaints with the Moore series is that it gets a bit too campy, somewhat near the end of his tenure.
Well, we're in the middle of his tenure. Like right there, Spy Who Loved Me and Moonraker are pretty campy. And they tried to rein it back in with the last few aren't as science fiction-y. But yeah, right there in the middle, they kind of did go. Although those are some of the best loved movies. Spy Who Loved Me and Moonraker are some of the most popular Bond movies, most financially successful. In fact, with Live and Let Die and Man with a Golden Gun, the franchise was kind of at a dip. And then when they went to Spy Who Loved Me, that really revitalized the franchise and was a huge blockbuster.
Although View to a Kill, they have that ridiculous thing where like Bond is driving around.
There's a lot you could pick at A View to a Kill about. That's true.
Well, see, that's another thing too that's hard, especially people my age, us Zoomers, to understand is that this is what I love about the Bonds is they're a reflection of their times, and it's like one of the only, I think it is the only franchise you can really point to, especially specifically in film, that's been around this long, where you can see a clear reflection, like for like every other year, pretty much, and a lot of those more ones work for that time. Maybe they go a little bit too far at times, even for that time. But in the context of the time, it makes sense why they were the way they were. Same with the ones we have now, the ones in Connery, et cetera, et cetera. And that's why you get these people that are kind of like, oh man, imagine if Craig was in all these, or if we had Connery for all of them. I'm like, it wouldn't work. They only work for the times where they were in. Maybe some here and there you could say could have been done sooner or later had, Connery in a little longer, but they work for their times, and that's what's very interesting to me.
Yeah. And speaking of that, where would you guys like to see the Bond films, I guess, go from here? If you like
From this point on,
yeah.
I think they need to get back. I think they're, like I said in the last one, I think they need to get a younger Bond. I think after this movie, they really need to do like they did with GoldenEye. Make Bond fun again. Make Bond, you don't have to go too over the top, but just where you can go in and just have a good time with Bond. Maybe have a few, kind of go maybe a little lighter as a contrast to how dark, especially how this movie ended. How dark Craig got, maybe it's time to go a little lighter, more like the Brosnan era.
Yeah.
And do standalone Bond movies. You don't need to do the drama of the backstory. Have him go in and like, okay, 007, we've got, Dr. So-and-so is going to launch something, and he's going to blow up the world. We need you to come in and save the day. And him to go out on an actual mission, not on a revenge or any of that other stuff that kind of was throughout the entire Craig series, and just get back to good old-fashioned fun James Bond.
Yeah, the one thing I don't want is I don't want them to do a reboot of Bond again.
Well, I mean, every time a Bond takes over, they do kind of a soft reboot. This one, I don't want them. Yeah, I don't want them to start with an origin story or anything like a really hard reboot.
Yeah, when I'm
just go in, Bond's already Bond, and just like they did, like when Moore took over, Dalton or whoever. It's understood that this is a different Bond, but it's still the same guy. It's still James Bond, and just get on with. You don't have to address it. You don't have to. The one eye-rolling moment in the otherwise flawless On Her Majesty's Secret Service is when Lazenby turns to the camera and he's like, "This never happened to the other fella." Nothing like, you don't need to address it. Just boom, like Live and Let Die. I mean, basically it was Roger Moore just seamless took over. Everything that happened was just understood that his career, that this is just has always been Bond. That's all they need to do. Just a very soft reboot. Because obviously the Craig era is done. I mean, it's its own thing.
Yeah, it's done for sure.
And I think naturally they have to go back to how things used to be. I think that's literally the only path. And I think the natural length too is to make it a little lighter. I think that's kind of the mood of the country right now, is we want things a little more escapism-y. I know it's very vague, but that's kind of why I like this, is it had more of those fun gadgets, shit like that. And I think it's got to go more into a lighter mood with more humor probably. And
yeah,
I don't want to say all Kingsman-y because that's kind of a parody of Bonds, but you get what I kind of mean by that. Mm-hmm. But I think too, this is the only thing I'm concerned about is, and I don't think they're going to do this now because of the backlash and how it could just be a bad business decision in general, is I was afraid at the end of this movie, oh, this is when they start the female James Bond. This is how they start the whatever swap race, gender, whatever of Bond, because he's dead now. And now we can start a clean slate in a progressive era. And that's the only thing that worries me. I don't think they'll do it because I think just financially it'd be a stupid decision. But I know the direction this should go. I'm afraid it could go the other way.
The Broccoli's, the last time I checked, have said that Bond is always going to be a straight male. And
they have, but they've also probably said he wouldn't die. So I don't know.
I don't know if it's ever come up. I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know.
Maybe because everybody assumed he wouldn't.
We're definitely not going to kill him off.
Yeah.
I mean,
hopefully it was understood.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the problems is, I think one of the things that I think they realized, and I think a lot of movies are starting to realize this, is that woke doesn't sell, very well. And I think they're starting to kind of they're starting to realize that. I think if they bring anyone to write a new Bond film, I think they need to bring Anthony Horowitz in to write a Bond movie, because he's got a good mix of, he knows Bond well, but he also, I wouldn't really say he's modernized Bond, because all of his Bond novels take place in the past, but he's definitely written his novels in a way that they're not misogynist like some of Fleming's stuff was, but they're still clearly Bond. He's still, kind of a ladies' man. He's still an agent. Yeah, he's still an agent, and I'd like to see his take on kind of the modern Bond. And since he's written screenplays, I think he'd be a good one to write the movies maybe in the future. So
I could see it.
As far as who Bond should be, I mean, people have floated around all sorts of names, but like Mark and I've said in the past, I'd like them to find someone relatively unknown.
If I were to pick a known, I've said this for a few years, I think Henry Cavill would be just perfect. But at the same time, an unknown would be really interesting. That would be a genuinely good subverting of expectations.
Yeah.
Which is what they've done I've said in the previous episode, this is what they've done before. Nobody knew who Daniel Craig was before Daniel Craig was Bond. And Roger, or Sean Connery for that matter, or George Lazenby. Nobody really knew who Timothy Dalton was. He did some supporting roles, and both Roger Moore and Pierce Brosnan really were mostly known as TV actors before they became Bond.
Yeah, which I found out the other day that my mom used to have a crush on Pierce from the Remington Steel.
Oh, I love that show. That was a great
Steel
TV
days.
show.
Yeah. And so
that's kind of like Star Wars, where they kind of get these unknowns, for some of it, I should say. And I think that's kind of what works well is that because it's kind of a blessing and a curse when you take on this role, because that's pretty much what you're going to be remembered for. You were the guy that played Bond. I mean, maybe done some other stuff, but you were Bond. And I think that is, I won't say it's why they pick unknowns, but it's the benefit that comes from it is that they don't have the baggage of being, oh, you were Bilbo Baggins. Oh, you were Harry Potter. It's like you don't have anything else that takes you out of it. Because that's something that George Lucas, when he made Star Wars, is that he didn't want, at the time, people to kind of associate actors with their other roles. He wanted the actor to be this role and just that. And I think that's kind of what helps this series. And, I don't know if people realize it, but I think that's partially what helps it.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think I've seen like concepts for Henry Cavill as Bond, and I certainly think he looks the part, and I think there are a couple of different actors that we could say they look the part, and I mean, heck, even if they wanted to do like a black James Bond, I wouldn't necessarily be opposed to that. My whole thing is, do they have the charisma of Bond, and can they really take on the role of Bond? I'd like to see them kind of go back maybe to book Bond a little bit in terms of personality. I mean, they've already done that a little bit with Craig, but I mean, I also feel like Craig kind of made Bond his own a bit, if that makes sense. So
yeah,
it's interesting. It'll always be interesting to see what, if anything, they do with the game franchise in the future now that, everything with Bond is kind of totally out in the open right now. So.
Well, one thing I also want to mention before we close is my theater experience, because it was a unique one, to say the least, because I either try to go to a movie like opening so that I don't get spoiled, or when it's dead, so I can be in a nice quiet theater, nobody bothering me, no yum yum yum, all the freaking noises you get when you want to hear something that's like a quiet scene, or yap yap yap, text text text. These like freaking spotlights that come out from everywhere. It seems when people turn their phones on with light mode on, full brightness. It was not. It was. Initially, I go in there because I go early to get good seats. I got there 45 minutes early, got my dead center seat. I'm like, all right, 15 minutes passed, nobody showed up. It's a good sign. And then people come in. And first, I get this person, it's like mostly full, that wanted to swap seats with me. And I was like, sorry, I'm keeping this seat. I'm not giving it up. Usually I'm not like that, but I was just like, nope, not dealing with that. And then I get right to my left, this group of like 4 dude bro frat guys that for the entire freaking movie. We're talking, like, I am talking yelling the whole time. And like it's like if this was a one-off thing, it'd be comical. But they're like, yeah, fuck yeah, man. Here's my man kicking ass. Oh, she's hot. Like, so obnoxious.
Oh my
I was
God.
like, I want to say something, but if I say something, it's going to ruin it more for me. If I don't say something, they're going to keep ruining it. But they kind of toned it down a bit, but it was just like, God, I want to just have a private theater and just that's it. One of these days.
There, the only instance I had with that was there was one woman sitting behind me, that like complained because Anna Damas's dress showed like a little too much cleavage,
It did show a lot.
or or whatever. And I turned behind her and said, "Ma'am, this is a Bond movie. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the franchise, but
What a
this is
savage.
but this." I said, "What?" I said, "If you think this is bad, watch GoldenEye. Watch GoldenEye."
Oh
Believe
my
me, it was
God.
only through the magic of movie making that she could jump, fight, kick, and not have her boobs pop out of that dress.
Yeah. But by the same token though, I also was kind of like, I never got what the appeal with Anna de Armas was up until this point, but now I certainly understand.
Well,
Uh,
she's hot. I'd argue she's hotter in Blade Runner. I don't know why, but she looked hotter.
yeah, um, I mean, she was kind of a nice throwback to some of the Bond girls from some of the games.
Hmm.
But yeah, and I mean, that's the other thing is I feel like they need to kind of bring back the more traditional Bond girls, I guess, too, as kind of like, bring back the fun of some of it.
Hmm.
But
Yeah, really. I mean, looking at the Craig era, I mean, you had Vesper, which I thought she was a good Bond girl. But then after that, you had in Quantum, you had that character whom Bond didn't even sleep with. Then you had Moneypenny, who I guess she's a Bond girl. She really didn't do much in that movie. I mean, that movie
Hmm.
really kind of went without a traditional Bond girl. And then the last two movies was the same girl. It was Madeline for two movies. And so yeah, Craig really never seemed to have like the traditional kind of Bond girl. It was a
Mm.
kind of one and done thing that he wasn't mooning over for. I mean, good Lord, we're in as much as we're now into No Time to Die, and he's still pining over Vesper, who he wasn't really with all that long. But
which again goes back to my whole thing of this, for a 15 years story, thing, like to the average person, they're not going to remember, who to the average moviegoer, they're not going to remember who Vesper is.
oh yeah,
And
Yeah.
so, that was like all, and even me, I'm like, we're still hung up on this. I mean, kind of the idea with
Quantum was
Quantum
he
was
left
that
her behind. Yeah,
he got closure, um, regarding his death. And Skyfall really focused on his relationship with M and whatnot. I am a little disappointed with. I thought they were going to set like more backstory in regards to his parents and whatnot after Skyfall, but
I
they
mean,
didn't.
really, in the books, that was about it. I mean, we knew that they were on a climbing expedition and they died in a climbing accident, and that was about it. I mean, they didn't. It wasn't like something they dwelt on in the books all that much. It's kind of all you really need. They weren't really. It wasn't like they were spies or anything. They were just kind of
That
semi well off people, I guess.
that's kind of like that was kind of like one of the things that my mom asked was like, were they double O's? And I'm like,
No.
no, they weren't double O's. And I read the whole climbing accident thing before. I just felt like that could have been misleading to some people, I guess.
Speaking of
But
parents, that's another thing that happened during my experience was at the very beginning when Madeline's mother just gets like machine gunned to death. The fucking dude pros laughed at that.
God.
That's what I'm telling you. My experience was fucked. It was so
I
weird. They just like cut to that and they're like, ho, 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 ho. I'm like, what? I couldn't even laugh at their
I
laughing because it was just so weird.
I yeah, I was just kind of like, you know, yeah, again with the whole siphon thing. I felt like they gave him like a good introduction, but then just kind of did nothing with his character for like the movie. It kind of
Mm.
seemed like he was going to be another Silva type
Well, he
character.
was I mean, kind of like Silva. Silva was focused on killing M. He was focused in on killing. Oh, of course, Blofeld's focused in on ruining Bond's life. Silva was focused on ruining M's life. Now Safin comes along. He's focused on ruining Blofeld's life, and that was his whole thing. He at the beginning he's taking out Mr. White's family. He goes on. He's develops this. He takes out Spectre. He takes out Blofeld, and then once that happens, for me, I was like, okay, what is up with this character? His motivation after that kind of lost me because at that point I was just okay. Now you're just being a dick
Well,
for the sake of it.
well, the other thing too, I was like, wait, is he in love with Madeline? And I'm like, what? I'm like, what's this all? I'm like, wait, so he's in love with Madeline, but yet he wants to poison her, and I'm like,
I was really confused about his age. So he didn't look like for something. She was a little girl when he met her. He didn't look like.
Yeah.
And then supposedly, like if she was like say 10 maybe, and now she's in her 30s, that's like 20 some odd years. It didn't look so. Was he, if he was mid 20s then, is he supposed to be like in his 50s? Like he didn't look like he aged. I don't know how old he was supposed to be now and how old
yeah,
he was supposed to be then. I was
That
kind of
was
confused
something
on
I
that
thought
too,
too.
because that was a
You're not
huge jump
alone
in
in that.
time.
Oh yeah, and then the
yeah,
movie itself jumps 5 years, which initially I was like, oh, we're just gonna jump 5 years, okay. But it made sense now, when obviously when the movie played out, but because then she gets pregnant and shit like that, and then baby happens. But yeah, I was saying the same thing with him. Is like, dude, like you had to be like in your 20s or 30s when you murdered her mother. Like you can't do that as like a 10-year-old. Like you gotta be at least a decent age. And then she has to be in her 30s at least when she's with Bond and having a kid. So yeah, he's gotta be like 50 something. I'm like, you don't look it, you don't act it.
and I mean, I'm willing to suspend my belief with some of that, but again,
Yeah.
his motivation is just his motivations as a character were all over the place. And of course you can argue, oh, well, he's crazy, but it's like even Silva, who was crazy, had like motive, had at least like a coherent motivation. I mean,
Yeah.
Bond,
Well, he seemed crazy, but he didn't really seem like he wanted to kill anybody. Like other than Blofeld and Spectre, because he kills Mr. White's wife. He actually saves Madeline from drowning. He saves her life. Later on, when he meets her, he says, "You owe me. I know about your." He hints that he knows her secret, her daughter, and he gives her the poison. He says, "All I want you to do is go in, shake it, deliver the weapon that's going to kill Blofeld, and that's it.
Mm.
I have no interest in you." And if Bond hadn't have really gone back, he didn't really care. And when he had Madeline's daughter, he let her go. He really didn't seem to have any interest in killing Bond unless Bond was going to interfere with his plans. And there was at least half a dozen ways Bond could have stopped him. So it was like he really didn't seem like the psycho killer type, which made his plan of mass murder even more confusing.
Yeah. And I think that initially is interesting is that you have a villain that genuinely doesn't want to kill a lot of people. And I thought that was what I initially was approaching it as too. And that's where him letting the daughter would go makes sense. But then again, what doesn't make sense is he wants to kill everybody else. So it's like, it was definitely the weakest part. But I think this movie overall, if I were to, and I don't like doing this, but rank it amongst Craig's films, it's probably at number 3 for me. That's kind of how it sits. I'd put Skyfall number 1. I know it's a hot take, but it's just my personal favorite because it overall.
I love Skyfall.
Yeah, I love it. It's so rewatchable. When I saw it,
fun.
though, because
it's a fun movie, and it's kind of standalone almost. As much as standalone as you can get with a Craig movie.
Yeah, and that's why I liked it. I mean, when I initially first saw it, I mean, I think it's because I was younger. I couldn't appreciate things as well. I was like 13, I think. I was kind of like mixed. I was like, I don't know if I like that. And then I watched it second, third time. I was like, whoa, I love this. Like, what was I thinking at the time? But it stands on its own. It has all the elements. It does them well. It's modernized without not being too modern and not too old-fashioned. It just does everything right, especially for the 50th anniversary. It just did it all right. Great theme song, great cinematography. Just everything's pretty much perfect. And then I put Casino Royale. Never been a big fan of it, and I think that's because I didn't see it at the time, so I didn't understand the whole hype of it. But I do enjoy it, and I like it. Then I put this one. Then I put Spectre, and then Quantum.
I think that's pretty much my ranking. Swap Casino and
Skyfall.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah, that's fair.
I mean, Casino was my first Bond in the theater.
Mine was Skyfall.
So that was part of
Mine
it.
Was a View to a Kill. Not to age myself, but
well, hey, you got to see
see more.
You got to see more, and you got to see Christopher Walken before he was really
on big screen. Yeah, Christopher Walken on the Golden Gate Bridge and on huge screen at the theater.
Yeah, before he became Christopher Walken. So yeah, and I mean, you got to see the Dalton era in theaters as well. I'm assuming, at least.
Yeah, from then on, every movie was on the big screen.
Nice.
Yeah. I mean, so yeah, Casino I feel is just a good, like, even taking it out of the Bond franchise, it's a good like action thriller movie, kind of on its own too. That just happens to be a Bond movie.
I have to say, one of the best opening sequences is in that. I forget where they're in, but when he's chasing that dude jumping on the cranes.
Oh, yeah.
That shit was awesome.
And seeing that in the theater was awesome. And Mark, I know you said you're afraid of heights too, so.
Dude, yeah. I'm afraid of heights. It made me more afraid of heights.
Yeah. I mean, I would really love to have seen GoldenEye in the theaters too. Opening
day, I was so, because it had been so long. I mean, it had been since that was 95, and the last Bond movie was 89, and I mean, all I had in between was James Bond Jr., the cartoon show, and I mean, I was ready for new Bond, and Pierce Brosnan, the trailers looked amazing. I mean, I was counting down for that day. And when I saw it, I was just like, a new era for Bond. I was so happy.
Yeah, Pierce's whole story with Bond is pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Especially considering that he was supposed to get it and then didn't get it. And then wasn't he was married to one of the Bond girls,
Yeah,
actually.
he was married to Cassandra Harris. She's in For Your Eyes Only. She's the girl that Bond meets about halfway. She plays Countess Liesel, and she is like an associate of Columbo, the drug, not the drug guy. They think he's a drug guy. He's the smuggler. And there's halfway through the movie, he kind of tells her to go off with Bond and get a little information. And so they go off together. They spend the night together. The next morning, they're walking together along the beach, and the bad guys come up and kill her. They run her down in dune buggies. One of them being Charles Dance. Charles Dance from Game of Thrones fame, one of his very first roles. He's one of the goons that kills her. And Pierce Brosnan was on set because his wife was filming, and that's how he kind of got to know Albert Broccoli, and kind of came on his radar and thought, yeah, he'd be a decent Bond.
Really. So Albert Broccoli was still around when Pierce.
Yeah, he was. I'm trying to remember when he passed. It was during. I think he
right
was there
before
when
Craig. I think right.
Oh yeah, before Craig. I mean, he was somewhat in the. He got into the Brosnan era before he died. I mean, his health was bad. He was kind of passing more of his stuff off to his daughter Barbara and his stepson Michael Wilson.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I know that he was, that he kind of, that like his last wish was that Pierce would play, Bond. So that was kind of his last act. But I think he passed right before Brosnan, actually, before GoldenEye got released. So
take a look.
I have to say too, 'cause I know Pierce's movies sometimes get a bad rap, and maybe it's my childhood bias, but I thought he was amazing. Like, he's really good in it.
I love Pierce. I'm a huge Pierce Brosnan fan. I'm not a huge fan of Die Another Day.
Yeah,
but not because of Pierce. That one. I sit down and I watch it, and it's one of the reasons as crazy as the Roger Moore ones. I always love Roger Moore. As crazy as Die Another Day gets with the surfing and the all the invisible cars and stuff, Pierce does not disappoint in that movie.
Yeah,
he makes it so watchable.
I think all of his are
but respect for that man.
I mean, I think GoldenEye is his best one, obviously, but I think the rest are fine except Die Another Day. That's the one where I just kind of like, and they show it like 50 times on the movie channels. I'm like, of all of his that you're showing, like, jeez.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and Pierce, I feel like maybe should have gotten like one more. I mean, he did kind of get like a send off in the games a little bit with Everything or Nothing, but I mean, the thing with video games is like you can't even play those older games anymore unless you have like a console for them.
Yeah.
So,
I
that
think too is like the sentiment towards Bond and the mood of the nation kind of was changing around then, and the types of movies that we like, that I don't know if they could have done another with him. Like, I think his last, it's like, I think last two were post 9/11. At least one of them was.
Well, Die Another Day was.
Die Another Day, but Die Another Day had also been written pre 9/11 too.
Yeah, it was. Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, because think of the things that we started watching like post 9/11 was like Jack Bauer, Jason Bourne, shit like that. Totally different vibe. And now we're kind of going back to, I don't want to say what we had before that, but we're kind of going away from that a bit in terms of most movies.
Yeah.
Like even John Wick, as serious as it is, like it's, I don't know if I'd throw in the same class as those because it's a bit more, I don't know where I'd throw it because it's kind of its own little thing. But, it's like even just looking at that shows how actions change. Where it's like Jason Bourne's in many ways ridiculous, like that he can like kill people with a toaster. But John Wick is like way more about
fantastical.
Yeah, that's a good word for it. Yeah, he's more. Yeah, he's he'll kill a person with a pencil, but like his gun training is legit. his actions all legit. Like, it's a totally different way of doing it.
Yeah. And I mean, even just like taking 1/4 of that for the new Bond, series, I think would be fine. I mean, like Mark said, just making it fun again.
Well, see, and
So
that's the interesting thing that I think is going to be is how does Bond differentiate itself going forward? Because you have Mission Impossible with Tom Cruise doing 2 more. They're going to be awesome, and he's going to do crazy stunts. Does Bond become the crazy stunt movie, or does it become the hyper realism movie? Does it become the fun spy movie? Like, where does it go in terms of not just the actor, but the tone and the style is what I think is going to be
That's the
interesting.
$1 million question. That is the $1 million question.
I feel
Yeah,
like they've
literally
already,
$1 million
yeah,
or
$1
more.
billion question.
Yeah.
I feel like I feel like they've kind of already done hyperrealism with the Craig era somewhat.
Yeah, and that's what
You know,
confuses me. Like, I would love to make a prediction right now and be like, Sam, screenshot this, I'll be right, but I don't know.
yeah, I just hope that whatever they do, the Broccolis hold on to the franchise, for as long as possible, or at least that they have offspring that are willing to kind of take things over because it's their family legacy, and I feel like
Yeah.
they've been pretty faithful to they've been pretty faithful to Fleming's uh character, and so when if another studio gets their hands on, I'm not sure it'll be quite the same. So,
hmm
but
Well,
I,
Amazon now
interest,
technically owns it.
they own, yeah, but I think the Barbara Broccoli, Michael G. Wilson still technically have creative control.
Yes.
So
Yep.
they have complete creative control. And really, ironically, kind of once George Lucas sold off Star Wars, kind of the last of the truly independent filmmakers as far as independent franchises go. I'm trying to think. I don't know. I couldn't name another one that was because for a while it was, George Lucas had his Star Wars that he controlled, and the Broccoli's had Bond that they controlled. But once, George sold up, I can't think of anybody else that's truly as independent as they are.
It's a good
I
point.
I do know that like if they sell the franchise to anyone, they should sell it to a guy named Mark Hunt. I
Oh,
really I really trust him with the
I'd
franchise.
throw in my 2 cents worth.
I'm sure you would. So I've often thought too though that Dennis Miller he would come up with an interesting kind of Bond thing. I know that he did write a script for Batman Returns that uh, never saw the light of day, but that was interesting.
He was kind
So
of the Phoebe Waller-Bridge to that one because they brought in Phoebe Waller-Bridge to kind of script doctor this Bond movie, throw in a few jokes. That's kind of what he did with Batman and Robin, although they didn't use any of his stuff.
yeah, and I think it would have been a lot better move. I think it would have been a better movie if they had, but
It couldn't have been any worse.
that's just my opinion. I could be wrong. So
And now they're rebooting Batman again.
yeah, yeah, that's the other thing. They're rebooting everything, and they're giving him another origin story, which is not what Bond. I mean,
Yeah.
really, I don't really think any of these characters need reboots. I just think we just need standard adventures at this point.
Yeah.
So, but
I do know this. After this movie has been out, I'm now more worried next summer that they're going to try and do the same thing and kill off Indiana Jones and Indiana Jones 5. I'm like, please, as much I'm getting over Bond being killed. I don't need Indiana Jones to be killed or anything like that.
yeah,
Let that one end with him living happily ever after.
well,
Because we know that's pretty much it's going to be his last movie too.
and they're planning on making a third Blade Runner movie, which,
Are they?
I've heard rumors. If they're going to do that, they had better do that quickly because I mean,
Mm.
Harrison Ford is getting up there.
They've already had to hold up production a couple times. He's getting like he's in his, mid to late 70s. He's getting banged up in this Indiana Jones movie. They've already had to pause production. He's broken limbs and he's got those old brittle bones. Not, God, when I get that age, I hope I'm half as fit as he is then. But
yeah,
he can only keep doing this for so long.
Yeah, well, and he's also like he's also been like in multiple plane crashes too. I know
Yeah.
how he hasn't died from any of those. I'm a bit amazed. It's weird that like he's still around. I mean, it's funny. It's interesting that like Sean Connery lives until like 90 or 91, I think.
That was impressive.
Even though, for the last decade or so, really the last 15 years of his life, he really didn't do anything. So
Yeah, he retired pretty much.
Yeah,
actually, what will be my next movie going experience that I think you'll like, Sam, is Dune. I cannot wait to see that.
I am curious. I am curious about that. I can't. I've never been able to get into the book. I've tried, but it's too long of a slog.
I've never read the book, but it's our boy Denis. I trust him, and it looks like they're going balls out. I mean, it's got an insane cast, like insane cast.
As someone who has read the books, I'm totally looking forward to it. It has, and really, a near perfect cast. Like when I hear all the characters and who they've got to play them, it stuns me how I was like, man, that's perfect. That's perfect.
Yeah. As long as we don't get, Sting in a Speedo again. Yeah.
What worries me about Dune though is that they have the whole book. They only filmed the first half.
Yeah.
And Denis wanted to do parts 1 and 2 back to back, kind of like Lord of the Rings style. And the studio was like, they didn't have the faith. They're like, we don't know about that. So now especially because most of this was done pre-COVID, it's going to be really hard. I mean, this thing is going to have to be a mega blockbuster for them to all of a sudden go back and like, all right, now we got to get everybody back together again. It's going to be that much harder when they could have just filmed it all as one production. So, I mean, unless this thing makes $1 kajillion, it's going to be up in the air if we even get to see the rest of the book, part 2.
Well, I could be remembering wrong. I'll Google it, but I think they greenlit a part 2, or maybe but they didn't greenlit for him specifically to direct it.
Mm-hmm.
There was something weird that I heard recently, but yeah, that's a valid concern because I mean, his previous film didn't do well at the box office, even though I loved it. People who are fans loved it, but
I loved it too.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of my favorites, if not my favorite movie. But that's the problem with that he's in. Is he made this big bet and then went bad, technically from a financial standpoint, and now they're giving him another big bet that's arguably even bigger.
Yeah, and I mean the thing it is Dune is even less mainstream than Blade Runner is.
Yeah.
And so I mean, even though I'm not even though I haven't read the book, I've seen the movie and I've seen the miniseries, and I understand Dune well enough to appreciate it because I appreciate complex sci-fi. But will the average will appeal to the normies, I guess.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that's who you have to appeal to. That is kind of one of the things with even Bond that people are like, oh, I guess Bond is over now. It's like, no. Do you guys not read that any of the movie blogs or anything? I guess most people don't. So
no.
Well, it's funny too, and I'll address the Dune thing in a second, but the only people that stayed in the theater with me were these group of 3 older women in the very back, Everybody else had left. We were the only ones staying after the credits. I'm like, they know. They get it. They've been here before. But with Dune, it says on Wikipedia, I think this is what I heard, is that there's plans amongst multiple writers and other people that there should be a sequel, not confirmed by the studio. The only thing the studio did say is they assured Denis that a sequel will be greenlit as long as the film performs well, not in theaters, but on HBO Max. I don't know about that, but I think it could because of the cast and maybe some people are craving something interesting and new. I don't know if it's going to perform well, to be honest, but the early reviews said that it's a kind of a mixed bag of reviews of ranging of how good it is, but they're all saying that it's good. But they say it ends abruptly, but it also has a lot of quietness to it, a lot of slow bits, but also a lot of action for the normies. So
I'm really curious. Considering it's part one, it probably will end abruptly.
Yeah.
As someone who's familiar with the story, I'm really curious where they make the cut. But I don't know. I know they kind of want to do a franchise, but as obscure and as kind of out there as Dune is, each book after that, Dune Messiah, Children of Dune, they're bonkers crazy.
That's what I've heard.
Sam, you said, did you watch this? You said you saw the miniseries. Did you see the second miniseries, Children of Dune?
I don't. I want to say yes, but I don't remember.
That miniseries, they took the second book, Dune Messiah, and Children of Dune. They took those two books and made one long miniseries, and it's out there. It's crazy, especially when you get to the end.
Well, don't they actually all turn into sandworms and?
Well, spoilers.
Yeah, I don't care.
Paul Atreides' son, Leto Atreides, he's the main character in Children of Dune, and that's what happens to him at the end of Children of Dune. And then the fourth book, God, Emperor of Dune, takes place like 1,000 years later, and he's like a gigantic sandworm I think he has like a human head. So he's kind of evolved into a gigantic sandworm, and he's living, and it goes even crazier after that. So they tend to get less and less what I would call commercially accepted for something that would require like a multi-million-dollar budget, because they just go so crazy. It's really hardcore science fiction.
Sounds trippy.
Out there. It is very trippy.
Do you think they could have made the first book into like 1 3.5-hour movie or something like that?
Oh yeah, David Lynch kind of did that. His movie gets a lot of grief, but he does a fairly decent job of adapting it. And there's an even longer version, an uncut version that's even longer, which is more like 3 hours. But yeah, it could have easily been done. Because if they're only doing the first half of the book, I don't know what the runtime of this new one is. I'm assuming about 2.5 hours.
Yeah, it's pretty long, I think.
Yeah, at times I'm thinking they might even have to pad it up a little bit. Kind of like Hobbit, you took the one book and made 3 movies out of it. They're taking this one book, admittedly a thick book, and making 2 long movies out of it.
It's 2 hours and 35 minutes.
Okay, well, shorter than No Time to Die.
Yeah. Well, I think I know why they do this, but I would prefer it just be 3.5 hours, like Lawrence of Arabia or something. It's just one big epic. That's it. It's great. It's all one piece. But I know, hey, if we make $100 million on this one, what if we could do that again? And so they do 2 parts. Is the biggest trend in Hollywood for the past, I guess, since Harry Potter, where let's split in 2, make double, triple our money, which doesn't always work for me. I was one of the people that when I heard that about Harry Potter, I initially thought that's great because that book has got so much going on. That's great. But then when I saw how they did in the movies, I was like, this should have just been one movie.
I kind of feel the same way about the Marvel movies and the
Yeah, they technically did the same thing.
I mean, and I feel like, and I even told this to Christian, Mark. I feel kind of like the Marvel movies. Like, people didn't like the pause in Marvel movies. I thought it was great, just because at that point we were kind of getting inundated with Marvel movies, and I mean, you
You're
can't
really going to get inundated now. I think there's like a Marvel movie every month between now and spring.
Yeah,
Ugh.
and I mean, obviously, I don't know if you can see it, but in the bookcase behind you, like, I've got like all these Marvel graphic novels behind me. So, like, I've been a comic book collector, and like I'm a hardcore nerd. But even so, the MCU has just kind of become its own. It's become so big, it's hard to keep track of everything. So
Yeah, that's why I wasn't a big MCU person. Other than most of the movies felt the same to me. It's just too much work for to just watch one movie. You need to watch 20 of them to understand one of them. That's just not my thing. I get why people like it. I really get it. Just for me, it doesn't do anything for me. And I think because I see what it's really about, which is just like, hey, let's make a shit ton of money with this, which is, yeah, I guess all movies, but it's like, it gets so oversaturated. It feels boring to me. I know it's been said a million times, but I want more original shit.
which is another thing too, kind of bringing it back to Bond. I've read that, like, Amazon wants to do like a Bond expanded universe. And
Oh no.
Well, that's one good thing about the Broccoli's in control, because they're really against doing something like that.
Yeah.
I mean, look, if, like, for Dynamite and for the graphic novels, that's fine. Like, in the comics, do what you want. But as far as the books go, and as far as the movies go, I feel like they kind of need to, if they do anything, make a Bond movie every 2 years, like they used to back in the day. I would rather have that than do like a whole TV series of
Totally agree. Totally
of
agree.
James Bond, or do like a spin-off with Felix Hyde. I don't. Not every franchise needs to have like its own big universe or something.
Mm-hmm.
I agree.
So, well, any final thoughts on Bond? Or, I know we're kind of getting late here, and
It's going to be, I don't know. I get the feeling it's going to be a while. I'm hearing rumors that we're going to probably hear a new actor in 2022. I think they're just going to kind of wait and see how this one, and when it comes out on Blu-ray, I'm going to, it's going to go on the shelf and with all the others. And I'll probably, I'll definitely rewatch when I do my Bond rewatches. I'll go through it, and I'll just always know I'm going to have a lot of fun. But this is the one with a really crappy ending that I don't care for, and take it for what it's worth.
Mm.
How often do you rewatch Bond? I'm curious.
It's, every year or so is what I normally would do. And then, but with No Time to Die, I mean, it was like, okay, it was coming out. They kept pushing the date back. And then at one point it was like, okay, April 2020, I do my rewatch. I'm ready to go. They pushed it back. So I'm like, all right. So I kind of did another rewatch, getting ready for the new date. They pushed it back. Honestly, this time around, I just rewatched the Craigs. And so I try, I every now and then, I just, like, I'm in the mood for a Bond movie. I sit down, I'll start with Dr. No, and then it may be a week or a month, and I'm like, I'm ready for another one. Throw in From Russia with Love, and just kind of go chronologically whenever I'm in the mood.
Yeah, or I'll do by actor. That's kind of how I do that.
That's true, because one time I was like, I'm in the mood for some Pierce, and I just sat down and watched the Pierces.
Yeah.
So, and that's probably going to kind of be, especially with Craig, because the Craig movies are they're unlike all the others. They're not really you kind of have to start with the first one and kind of watch it as a series. I mean,
Yeah.
you talk about movies that are, that's kind of what Marvel is kind of, bring Marvel back into it. That's kind of how Marvel is. You kind of have to see the movies that take place before, and they're in, the big long story arc is a big thing now, especially in the Marvel movies. And it's kind of what they've done with Bond, really, at least in these 5.
Yeah, but at least they're like at least there are a few at least there are a few years apart, so you're not getting inundated.
Right, right.
I
And
mean,
in the case of this last one, a lot of years apart.
Yeah, and then I feel like one of the things that happened was like, and I was saying this to my mom, like when I was a kid, and like with the Star Wars prequel trilogy, it was special because Star Wars didn't come out every single
They were
year.
events.
It was like, yeah, it was an event. Now with a new Star Wars property of some kind coming out, it doesn't feel, and I mean I'm sure you had the same thing with your kids too, where Star Wars was a big thing, but it doesn't really feel that way anymore.
They were, they grew up. They were my kids. I mean, they were born in '97. Oh my gosh, when are you guys in '97?
I was not.
97.
I was 95.
Okay, my son was born '97 and one in 2000. They were like, they liked the Star Wars. But their Star Wars was Lord of the Rings. Those Lord of the Rings movies, to this day, they will watch those. They don't need an excuse. They will sit down and watch that. That was like their version of what I grew up with Star Wars and James Bond. They loved the Lord of the Rings movies. That's their thing.
Oh wow, yeah. So I'm curious. I'm curious to know what they'll think of the Amazon.
Oh, my oldest son is already like, he says it's going to suck. It's going to be his very opinion is, he's like, they're going to make it woke and it's going to suck.
Yeah, I mean, I know that Dennis hates Bordello of Blood, but what I've always said is Bordello of Blood has a better plot, even though it's a B movie. It has better plot than a lot of blockbuster
Oh, there's some
movies
amazing B and C and D
out there.
movies out there that are just classics.
Yeah.
See,
Um,
and that's, when you mentioned Star Wars there, that's why I don't like the Marvel formula and these other things they're trying to do, because it's just simple, like economics. The more you have of something, the less valuable it is. It's really that simple. More Star Wars, less valuable and special Star Wars feels. So that's maybe what helps this movie in a way. You waited so long, so many delays. When you finally got it, you kind of look at it through a different lens. Um, but yeah, I think that Lord of the Rings thing, I don't know. I think it could be good, but I don't trust Amazon.
they did okay with the Bosch books by Michael Connolly. That was actually pretty good.
Mm-hmm.
But other than that, they've really kind of been hit or miss with the Prime series. So
Yeah,
Yeah.
unfortunately, it's not so much Amazon. It's like whoever's doing it. You kind of like,
Yeah.
you hope whoever's holding the reins. If Peter Jackson was doing this Amazon Lord of the Rings series, I might have a little more faith that it would be something that would be close to Tolkien. But I don't know. I don't think he has any involvement whatsoever. Other
He's
than he might be
busy finishing the
executive
Beatles
producer.
movie, Let It Be.
Oh,
well, you're a Trekkie too, aren't you? I've seen you on Christian's
oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
Star Trek show. So I know that he can't really say anything about new Trek because he's kind of in the industry, but
Oh
I mean, I
shit.
I I think new Trek is kind of I tried giving Picard uh, a chance,
I heard it was
That's
and it
woke.
I mean, and sadly, Picard's probably the best thing, in my opinion, best thing they put out, and that's not saying much.
yeah, I know.
Discovery is just, oh my god, it's. I know diehard Trek fans that are just like, I know diehard Trek fans that are like, I can't even watch it, just dropped off and don't watch it anymore. They're a little more positive about this new one, Strange New Worlds, because the producers are swearing. They're like, we're going back to classic Trek. We're not doing long arcs. We're doing episodic TV. It's as good. We've heard what you're saying. We're going to make it more classic Star Trek. Whether they do that or not remains to be seen. So I know a few more diehard fans that are at least looking forward to that one. But most of the other stuff, it's an oversaturation. Like they got a hold of it and they're just churning stuff out now.
I feel sorry for Trekkies because I guess since Next Generation, they haven't had anything solid since then. It's like you got the original Next Gens, a few movies, but then everything else is just like nothing like what it used to be.
They, yeah. I mean, the only good thing about Picard was that they kind of brought Will Riker back.
That was my favorite episode too. Yeah, when they went back to classic Next Generation, that episode I really enjoyed, just because we got Riker and Troy back.
Well,
and then that was another series. I won't say the ending. That was another season. If you made it to the very last episode, how they ended that I was like, oh my god, what a crappy ending.
Oh yeah, I mean, I haven't even seen it, but Star Trek is one of those things where, like, if you spoil it for me, I don't care. But I'm like, yeah, they did what with Picard? I'm like, oh, okay, that's interesting.
I heard it's kind of woke.
Oh,
Sargon was saying.
I mean, I don't know. It's just, I don't know if it's so much woke. It's just not that originally written. I mean, good writing can cover a major, a multitude of sins.
Right.
It's just again, it's not episodic. It's one long story, and quite honestly, some of the middle episodes just get boring. And
yeah,
I mean, I don't even, to the point you're just like, what did you do? What did you do?
Well, that's the one thing that is interesting about this Bond movie is it was directed by the guy who did the first season of True Detective, and
yeah, that's what got me hyped for this.
Yeah, and I actually thought that, like, he did a pretty good job, except for, again, the fact that they killed Bond. But I'm not really sure if that was even his decision.
He contributed to the script, but the longtime writers of Neil Purvis and Wade, they've been writing for quite a while, going into back to the Brosnan era. In fact, they've been writing them, and then Cary Fukunaga, the director, came in. He did a pass at the script, and then they got Phoebe Waller-Bridge in to come in and punch up some jokes and stuff.
Which really kind of concerned me, because she was kind of on the Me Too bandwagon at first, but thankfully that didn't happen. I don't know. Whenever someone asks me about Bond, I'm kind of like, I'm the sexist, misogynist dinosaur from the Cold War that M warned you about. So that's that's my whole approach to things.
Yeah, I mean, they keep saying they want to update Bond for a new world. That's fine. If you want to update the world of Bond into the 21st century, that's fine, and the social norms and everything, but the character has to stay the same. That's what makes him James Bond, is that he is a throwback. He's kind of like your dad's hero. He's always kind of out of step with the times. He's always a little sexist. He's kind of, I mean, even Connery in Goldfinger, when that movie came out, he makes a joke about listening to the Beatles without wearing earmuffs. It just shouldn't be done. So even then, he wasn't cool and hip. He wasn't listening to what all the kids were listening to back then. He was kind of a throwback character, even in the beginning. So always, do what you will. Put him in the sexist Me Too movement world. That's fine. But don't change Bond. That's what makes it interesting, to see Bond in that era, that atmosphere.
That's something Sam and I were talking briefly before you hopped on, was they kept, at least, I forget who, if it was just critics or if it was even producers or anything, they were like, oh, we get to see Bond in the Me Too era. And I'm like, I didn't see that shit anywhere in the film.
I didn't either. Mm-mm.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I don't know what that was all about because I saw so many people saying that, and I'm like, where? Literally, where was that? He was just being Bond, and everybody else, frankly, was being closer to what Bond used to be and not where it was going with Craig.
I mean, there were some people that were like, oh, well, when Bond was crying and begging for mercy, I'm like that. Okay, I'm like that's not.
No.
I'm like that.
Yeah.
I'm like that's not Bond being woke. That's Bond showing his human side, which like,
Also, he had literally had a trick up his sleeve.
Right.
oh
He was
yeah.
going for his gun anyway. He was.
And that's when the moment at first I was like, why is Bond being a pussy? Like this is not Bond. But then I thought, no, something's up, something's up, something's up. And the more it went on, I was like, okay, yep, they didn't fuck that up good.
I mean, if you want to see Bond crying again, going back to On Her Majesty's Secret Service,
Right.
which I've seen probably at like 5 or 6 times now in my life, and that ending still always it gets me. I mean, no matter how many times I've seen it, and that melody is. I mean, I've heard grown men admit that they get choked up with
Yeah, and
that
say what you
melody.
will about George Lazenby. I think he kind of knocks it out of the park in that scene. He does a really good job. I mean, I
Yeah.
talk about different Bond actors. Lazenby at times, I think for this being his first movie, I think he knocked it out of the park in that scene. I I,
Yeah,
I, I do like me some Lazenby.
yeah, I don't. Yeah, I really wish he had stuck around, and I think I read like a Playboy interview with him later on where it was like, yeah, I regret not um doing another one. I think it would have been really interesting to see him maybe kind of go in the direction that Moore ended up going in, with like Live and
Which
Let Die.
I mean, everyone is excited that Connery came back, but if you watch Diamonds Are Forever, Connery's barely, he really phones that performance in. It's not Doctor No or Goldfinger. I
He,
mean,
yeah,
he's
he
he's
didn't
out of
want to do it.
shape. He's out of shape. I mean, he literally he admits he did it for a paycheck. They cut him a $1 million paycheck to do that movie, and he just kind of came back and did it. To his credit, though, he did donate the entire paycheck to charity. So,
Oh.
but I mean, he really just phones it in that movie.
Yeah, I feel like Brosnan's. I mean, I feel like Connery's last Bond movie isn't a Bond movie, but it's The Rock. If you've seen that, that's the one. And I mean, I'm not a Nicolas Cage fan. I'm like everyone else, where I like to parody Nicolas Cage. But say what you will, The Rock is a good movie
Oh, I
for
love The Rock. Yeah.
Sean Connery on. So
That was something else I was seeing is there were people that were like, "Oh, this wasn't a Bond movie," but then people are like, "No, it's got more of the Bond movie things in it." And I kind of see both sides to it because in some ways it isn't like a Bond movie, but in some ways it is more like one than what we've seen recently, which I didn't mind.
yeah, um, yeah. I mean, I think we'll have to revisit this movie, in like in a year or two, just to see how it holds up. It'll be interesting to see how this kind of ages.
Mm.
Because
And
like
that's why I was telling people, it's like, I really don't know what I feel about this. Kind of have to wait and see. It's really weird. It's nothing
yeah,
like I've ever seen before in some ways.
Oh, I agree. I'm still, I'm all over the place with it. I got to sit with this one for a while.
Yeah, because I think I was posted on Facebook. I'm like, I think this might be like the Last Jedi of Bond, except it actually has good stuff in it. But in terms of
Yeah.
polarization, it's like that, where I think you're gonna have people that just love the risks they took, and then people that hate it. But it's definitely a better quality movie. But in terms of polarization, I think it's gonna be similar.
yeah, and I mean, Mark is right. The fact that Craig dies in this one, and we now know I mean, that's going to paint kind of that's kind of going to paint that kind of paints him in a new lens now. Kind of like, well, I enjoy Casino Royale, but I know he's going to end up
He's the Bond
dying.
that dies. That's what
Yeah.
he's from here on out. That's his legacy. He's the Bond that dies.
And
Yeah.
also the fact that like he never really got over. I mean, I guess he never really got over Vesper in a way. Um,
Well,
you know,
I mean, at the end, I mean, he seemed to always get over it. That's the thing. He seemed to always be getting over her. Quantum, he drops the necklace. He got over her. Okay, move on. In Spectre, he picks up the videotape of her interrogation. She asks him about it. He just kind of, he's like, oh, well, he tosses it aside. I'm like, oh, he's over her. And then in this one, he goes to her grave and lights the the little paper that says "Forgive me." He lights it and drops it. I'm like, yet again, he's getting over her. He seems to always be trying to get over her.
yeah, he says forgive me, and then the mausoleum blows up in
Right.
his face.
Like, how many times can the one man get over the same woman over and over and over again? Symbolically get over her. I mean,
Which again, the forgive me thing, that kind of was like they've done that before, and I've never really understood. Even in Quantum, I mean, in Quantum, I forgot, I got the whole thing of you need to forgive her. I understood that, but like they never explain what Bond feels guilty about. I guess is it like for holding a grudge or
I
I
guess
don't yeah
it's
I
because
don't
really in the books, her name pops up every now and then, but he's in the books he's gotten over her. In
yeah
fact,
and
Casino Royale, the book ends. The last line of the book is
the
him
bitch is
talking
dead.
to him, and he's like, "Yeah, the bitch is dead," and that's where it ends. And then the movies kind of took it a little further and tried to
Yeah,
give a
and
redemption arc and everything, and
yeah,
which is fine, but they just keep going back to that well.
I mean the books do kind of have a chronology of their own, but at least Thunderball through You Only Live Twice. That's the Spectre trilogy.
Yeah, and it kind of leaks over because, well, You Only Live Twice, the novel, ends with him going to that island like they did in No Time to Die. And interestingly enough, when he kills Blofeld, it blows up or something. He's presumed dead. They think Bond died on that island, which is interesting because they literally have killed him off in this one. In that book, though, he's missing and presumed dead at the end of You Only Live Twice. Then we find out like he got amnesia. He went off with this Japanese girl, actually had a kid, impregnated this woman, and had a son. And then when he gets his memory back. And then Man with the Golden Gun, the last Ian Fleming novel, has him coming back into the service. He's been reprogrammed to assassinate M. He's been brainwashed. And that it kind of opens up with him trying to kill M. And a bulletproof glass comes down and he fails. And then they have to kind of deprogram him. And then he goes off on a brand new mission.
So I forget when did Fleming die and was Gardner the direct successor? Because I know that like
no, he died. Fleming died writing his last novel, Man with the Golden Gun. It had to be finished later, and then they wanted to do more Bond books after his death. The idea was they were going to, let's see here. They were going to start a new Bond series, and they were going to get a pseudonym, Robert Markham, and they were going to have different authors come in and write. So then they wrote this book, Colonel's Son, by Kingsley Amis, writing as Robert Markham. And he wrote one book, and that was it. So it kind of sat on the shelf for a few years. Then Gardner came in and wrote, a dozen or so books. So there was like between Gardner and Fleming, there was a one-off book. And then, of course, after Gardner, then Raymond Benson took over, and then we had a bunch of one-offs again. And now it looks like Anthony Horowitz is going to stick with it because his third book comes out next year.
yeah, it's it's interesting because I know that like Fleming at one point actually wanted to kill off the character,
Hmm.
and then didn't.
But
And
he was smart enough not to.
I've heard various rumors as to why that was, why he ended up not killing him, um, which isn't which is interesting. One was
Yeah, because From Russia with Love ends with him supposedly killed.
yeah, and then the I mean the movies the Broccoli's kind of talked about of killing off Bond.
And
Uh,
then they did it.
yeah, years later. Yeah, the Broccoli's talked about of killing Bond, and then so did Hugh Hefner actually, since he was publishing Bond, at least the short stories in Playboy. So that was another thing. But yeah, it's I mean Fleming's life in and of itself is pretty interesting from what I've read, and I did
Yeah.
watch that documentary on him. So
Yeah. Yeah, but I've seen that one too. He's really interesting. And that's, another sort of thing I've always wanted to dive into was the novels, but never gotten a chance. One thing that we forgot to mention, though, real quick, is what did we think of the theme song by Billie Eilish?
mm,
Hmm. I thought it was not as good as Skyfall, but way better than Writing on the Wall from Spectre.
I
yeah,
agree, and yet I still really don't like her theme. Like, I really don't
It's
like
not
Writings on the
outstanding.
Wall.
It's nothing memorable. It's not like me singing around humming, Goldfinger or something. I thought it was okay. It wasn't as, I mean, Writing on the Wall to me is the worst Bond song ever. But yeah, it wasn't as,
I know it.
as memorable as some of the other ones.
It's the thing that kills me about writing on the wall was the fact that Radiohead was initially going to do the the theme song for Spectre, and it's actually out there. You can listen to it, and it's way better than what Writing on the Wall had, in my opinion at least. I'm
With
not a
Writings
big
on the Wall, the first few seconds, I'm like, ooh, let's go. And then he starts singing, I'm like, no, no. That's literally my reaction to when I first heard it. I was like, what were they thinking?
Yeah.
I I really I don't like I really can't get into any of Billie Eilish's music. I know that she's supposed to be the new hot thing in music, and maybe Mark, I don't know what type of music your two sons are
They
into, but
No, they knew I had no clue who she was when they announced Billie Eilish is doing the song. My first reaction was, "Who the hell is Billie Eilish?" And then, yeah, I had to ask my kids who she was, and then I like went on YouTube and watched a couple of her songs, the music videos, and I was like, okay, this is not my type of music. But and then when I was actually, it was weird. I was in Puerto Vallarta, Mexico, and I knew that they popped it hit iTunes. I remember the day it hit iTunes, and somehow I got a cell signal in Mexico, and I downloaded it and popped my headphones in and listened to it. I was like, all right, it's not horrible, but it's better than the last one was. So
yeah, it's not horrible, but it feels like a Billie Eilish. Like from what I've heard of her music, it feels more like her music as opposed to like a Bond theme song. So
That I think is the problem with it because I've listened to most of her music. I'm not a fan of her. I do appreciate what her brother does, because he writes all the music. Like they do it together, but he's clearly the brains behind her music. And she even like admits that she hates writing songs and he writes everything so much better. But I listen to her music and it's very, very simple, which I kind of appreciate, but it's got this kind of depressing, low voice mood to it, which there's a style to it, but I think when applied to Bond, it doesn't work. And in the context of this movie, I get it, but it it just doesn't really work for me. The song really doesn't feel like it goes anywhere or does much. It's a little too simplistic. It's a little too meh. Her singing isn't that great, honestly. She really doesn't sing. I don't want to say she can't sing, but she really doesn't sing well. And I mean, I generally I think, oddly enough, I think the best Bond themes are usually sung by women. I think it's just more appropriate for the franchise, oddly enough. Not saying the men can't do it well, because there have been some great ones, but usually the ones sung by the women tend to be the best. But hers just isn't. It's really low for me. It just, I don't think she was the right choice. I honestly, I know they wouldn't have done this, but I think the better way would have been to just bring Adele back. Do her for the final one with Craig. That would have been perfect.
Yeah. I mean, they did that with Shirley Bassey. You know, they brought her back for 2, I think.
3.
Yeah.
So,
3.
yeah.
Yeah, Diamonds Are Forever, Moonraker, and Goldfinger.
So why not do the same with Adele? I mean,
yeah, I think that would have been a good sort of like way of who, if anybody to bring back in a modern era, I think she'd be the one I would pick, because her theme I think is the best one since Goldeneye, and it works very well with the Bond, that particular Bond movie, but also just as a Bond theme overall, while still keeping it kind of Adele-y.
Yeah, although I actually like the theme for The World Is Not Enough, but that's...
Oh yeah, I love that one too. Shit, I can't believe I forgot that. Yeah.
Yeah, that's just me. The music video for that is weird as is.
You know, I like that music video. It's kind of Bondy. It's very Bond themed.
Yeah.
So I do like that music video.
Yeah. And Shirley Manson was the looker back in the day too. But yes, I mean, overall I guess one final question is, how do you feel like Craig ranks in general as Bond now that we've kind of ended his tenure? I went from like he was my second favorite Bond to like now I'm kind of mixed on him now as a result of just kind of everything.
I tried to have two sort of ways of looking at it, as there's the who plays it, and that's kind of its own rating, but then also who plays it plus their movie quality. And honestly, I kind of like, if I were to say just as who is Bond, I'd put Connery, Moore, Pierce, and Craig all in the same tier for me, as I like them all almost equally. I think the only one I'd put a little bit above is Connery for obvious reasons, but all of them, they're great for me. I can't pick one over the other for the most part.
That's pretty much in the because Sam asked me that in our last episode, and I'm always kind of like, my favorite Bond is generally the Bond I'm watching at the moment, because I'm such a huge fan. But I do love me some Timothy Dalton though. I love me some Timothy Dalton. But yeah, I mean, it kind of stands. It's, you know, all my Bonds are kind of like, I have yet to have a bad one. Sometimes they do a movie that's maybe not the greatest, but
yeah,
I haven't had any complaints so far.
Yeah, and I mean, as far as me, I still think that overall, I mean, I think Pierce will still probably be my, like, I guess, gun to my head, who's my favorite is probably going to be Pierce. And that's just because I kind of feel like he can do serious and he can do lighthearted at the same time. I feel like Craig as Bond was a good Bond. And like even Quantum of Solace, I feel like Quantum of Solace could have been good. They just did things, I guess, writing wise and structure wise with how they executed it that was really bad. I like the concept, just the execution was wrong.
Well, they were
So
in the middle of the writer's strike, and I think Craig even had to write some of the script. Like it's
Mhm.
wacky.
yeah,
Yeah.
and so I mean, Craig, I feel like got the most high and low disproportionate uh movies. But yeah, I mean, I think he'll be Bond. He'll certainly be one that lots of people talk about now, especially now that he's the Bond that ended up dying. So
Hmm His
that
bonds are like Windows releases. It's good, it's bad. It's good, it's bad. Like that's kind of how it goes. I think this is the one that kind of breaks it. Maybe. I think time will only tell. Because I think
yeah,
some people will look back and they'll be like, "That was a genius move. That was like the one time you could kill him, and you did it. Bold move." And then people are gonna be like, other people be like, "Nah, it's pointless. Why the hell did you do it?" Like I think that's how people will look at it, as either one of those ways. It will always be polarized. Now, I don't think there's ever going to come a time where everybody agrees that was great or that was awful.
the other thing too now is with someone brought this point up too when Craig became Bond, we didn't have the iPhone or any really like smartphone or smart device as we think now. And someone brought up the point that now with kind of modern era, it's harder to do the gadgets for Bond because so many things that would have been considered Bond like gadgets 20 years ago are now kind of commonplace. So it'll be interesting to see, and Craig kind of oversaw that more or less, I guess. So
Hmm.
in a weird way, it'll be interesting to see like where they go kind of with Bond tradition in the future. If they
I
do any
always
of that.
I always thought the best gadgets in the Craig era were the throwback gadgets. The
Yeah,
machine guns on the Aston Martin, the watch that does something. It's always been kind of the throwback ones that I always thought were the best.
yeah,
Because yeah, most of the stuff is, heck, we have, you know, back then in Moon or was it Octopussy when Q was showing Bond that, hey, there's a little TV on this watch here, and now it's like everybody has that. Everybody can watch TV on their watch now.
I do like Q's throwaway line, and I think it is like I think it's either Skyfall or Spectre where he goes. Were you expecting an exploding pen? We don't really go in for that sort of thing anymore.
Skyfall. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, kind of, kind of like a nice little nod to GoldenEye. So although I would love to have it like a gadget like that, somewhat. I think an exploding pen would kind of be interesting to have.
Yes.
So and I think just kind of from a fashion standpoint, Craig was one of the better dress Bonds, I think,
I
too.
think they're all dressed pretty well, actually, because from what I understand, they go through lengths of getting the perfect suit fit perfectly for each one, like even more perfectly than you could say tailored suits are. Like they
Yeah,
go through extra lengths, and it's what I did like about him though is that he seemed to have more of a variety of clothing. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but it seemed just to me that he seemed to have more of a variety of what he was wearing given the situation.
yeah. So and I did like the throwback to kind of like the 50s SAS, type uniform that they did for this last one. That it on the island that was kind of cool.
Oh yeah.
But all right, gentlemen. So any final thoughts or
No, I would just encourage everybody to see it, honestly.
yeah,
Why not? This is the
at
last one.
well at this point, if you haven't seen it, sorry, we just
Yeah.
spoiled the entire movie. That is one thing. It'll be interesting as more people see this. I mean, I think kind of the spoiler window, the no spoilers window is closing fast. I think it'll be interesting as more people see it. What other people's reactions will be. I
Oh,
think.
like this weekend, I've been going on Facebook, and there are certain Bond Facebook pages. They say no spoilers, no spoilers, no spoilers. People are spoiling it left and right. I can't believe they killed Bond. I can't. Like, it's out there. You really have to stay off social media at this point if you don't want to get spoiled on it, because it's everywhere.
Yeah.
I'm shocked I didn't get spoiled. I think it's because I was so busy with other stuff. But I was like, when I came out of the movie, I'm like, this is like the biggest thing that ever happened, and I didn't even know about it. Like, how did I not get spoiled? I got spoiled that Luke died. This one didn't get it. I was very lucky.
People were trying to spoil it for me. People were like tagging me in and something. I almost saw like a tweet where it's like Bond dies, and I'm like, nope. I'm swiping that notification away. away. But yeah, I mean, I feel like everyone kind of did a good job, with not spoiling it. I don't know, Mark. I know that Mark and I were supposed to do a black cast for this too, and I don't know if like Christian has even seen it yet or anything like that.
He texted. He saw it last night, I think.
I'm curious to know what his reaction to this stuff. I don't think he's as big of a Bond fan as we are. I think we're kind of the Dennis Miller Bond aficionados, but I definitely, I think I'm more curious to see what other people's reactions were to this. So, but yeah. Anyway, well, gentlemen, I want to thank you for both your time, and Mark, we'll have to chat about Planet of the Apes or some other franchises coming up here soon, and
keep in touch. We will.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and then Sean, I mean, you gentlemen both have podcasts, so do you guys want to plug your stuff?
Versa Media, tonight in about an hour and 15 minutes, we'll be streaming again on Versa Media YouTube every Saturday, 9:30 p.m. unless some shit's going down. It's always streaming.
So, and then Mark, I know you still have Planet of the Apes.
Oh, let me get the camera here. I don't know if you can see it there. That's the Planet of the Apes section. That's for Podcast of the Apes, Planet of the Apes fan podcast. There's my little Planet of the Apes wing of the museum down here.
Nice. Have you considered doing a Bond podcast or a Bond YouTube?
I've kicked it around only because there's so many out there. I was like, there was as opposed to like Planet of the Apes, there's really not. James Bond, there's so many James Bond podcasts out there. I would have to come up with an angle that would be kind of original.
Yeah, I was tempted to do one like a year ago, but they were already they're already out there. So I'm like, yeah, if one of the other Bond podcasts wants to invite me on or something,
there's a lot out there, yeah.
But I tend to like to do one-off shows kind of like this where we talk about Bond. So, but anyway, gentlemen, thank you for your time, and thanks to everyone for watching, and we'll talk down the road. And thank you guys for coming, and thanks to the audience for watching. So,
thanks for listening to The Whitfield Report on the NGC Network. Please visit Sam's website at www.thesamwhitfield.com and support Sam on Patreon at patreon.com/Whitfield Report. Until next time, God bless, God save this great nation, and God, freedom, legacy, in that order.